the week again. Sit back, relax, we got the brain of band. No need to stress in the house, is Van Bellen. The game is windsurfing, you can't yell them or tell them. We get the news, the views, the wind biz. The brand's gear tips plus the world's best quiz. Cars PWA. We're professionals without the pay. There's nothing in pole dancing that we won't chat. From tandem boards to a windsurfing cat. It's your one-stop shop for a laugh and listen. Tune in each week or you'll be doing the missing.
Well, good morning from Australia. As you can see, I am here by myself because Ben has flown to Portugal and unfortunately can't make it for this podcast, but that's okay because I'm going to do my best to look after this podcast. And today has been a day that we've talked about for quite a long time now. We're getting one of the true legends of the windsurfing scene back really from the early days of windsurfing. This gentleman has done it all, basically. Started a surfer, became a windsurfer, was heavily involved in the development of the sport early on, and then transitioned to strap surfing, big wave surfing, kite surfing, wing foiling. He's done it all. He's coming all the way from Maui, and the man, the legend, here he is, Pete Cabrinha. Welcome to the podcast.
How's it going, Paul? Good to be here.
Yeah, great. Thank you, sir. And once again, apologies for taking our time to get you on. I think there's actually quite a few people now, because we've been talking about you, are actually are excited to see you on here, mate. So how's life going for you?
Really good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's a trip for me because we just briefly discussed before, I'm 47. Actually, just so we got some perspective here, how old are you, Pete?
I'm 63. I'll be 64 at the end of the summer.
Yeah, okay, great. Because there's obviously in windsurfing, there's a bit of a generational thing. I think, there's the I guess the really early days, then there's myself that's kind of somewhere snuck in the middle of the sport, and obviously you've got the new generation that's coming through now. But it's really, I think, a lot of windsurfing and windsurfers obviously talk fondly of the good old days, and you were right in the thick of it. And I'm super. It's actually a weird thing to have you on here because I never in a million years, as a little kid watching these videos, like a classic was like Angle of Attack. Like that was one that I watched a lot. For any of you out there that hasn't seen this video, just type in Angle of Attack windsurfing video on YouTube. I actually uploaded it a few years ago. But never in a million years did I imagine that I'd be sitting here with one of the legends of the sport chatting on a video podcast. It's kind of bizarre, but anyway, here we are. So the wonders of technology. You wouldn't, yeah. So what I thought, Pete, we might as well, this is a windsurfing podcast, and we all know that you were started a very well-known and successful kite surfing brand, but we really want to focus mainly on the windsurfing side of things. So give us a bit of a background. Tell us, I believe you grew up on Oahu. Is that true? So just go back maybe to the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. I grew up in Kailua on Oahu. And, as I just said, I'm going to be 64. So I'm a product of the 60s, really. I was born in 61. And, surfing itself was kind of just going through a transition at that time. And, things like the leash, something that's just commonplace today, was just starting to make its way into the sport. And we were, running down to the dive store and buying, the stretchy surgical tubing and making leashes for our surfboards. And believe it or not, the leash was a pretty controversial thing at the time. Just to put that out there to show that how when things evolve, even things that are so commonplace today, weren't always so commonplace. Anyways, I grew up as a surfer, and that was my life. I just did that every day since I was a very young kid. And then when I was 15, my friend had a windsurfer sitting on the side of his house, and I never asked how he got it, but there was really only, maybe a dozen or more windsurfers in Hawaii, maybe a bit more, but at the time I didn't really know. I'd never even really seen him. And he's like, "Hey, I got this thing. It's called a windsurfer. You want to try it?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And so he took me down one day and I gave it a go. And mind you, that was a 12-foot board. The booms were made out of wood. Those 8 feet long. And the sail was, this giant spinnaker. But for some reason, it grabbed me on day one. Like I did, I was flat water. I did it and I was like, wow, this is kind of fun. And I lived on the windward side of the island. So it was always, for us surfers, it was always windy. It was onshore winds. And so suddenly I had something that I could deal with this wind. And at the time I didn't think I was surfing, even though it was called a windsurfer. But it was a fun thing to do, like on the windy days, and on the days that there was no wind, I would surf. And I don't think, I guess I was going to say, I don't think anybody realizes the level that it actually grabbed me. But if you're a windsurfer, you know what happens. At the time, it was the most dynamic thing outside of surfing in its own right. It was the most dynamic thing that I was doing. And it was just so incredibly addicting. And that just took over for me. I was just in. And I windsurfed every single day, sometimes at night. I lived where I could walk to the beach. And, I was a teenager. I'd go out, I'd, party with my friends and stuff. And I'd come home and it would be, I don't know, like 11 o'clock at night. And I'd be like, I'm not done with the day. Like, I want to go windsurfing. And I would drag the thing out in the water and go windsurfing at night. And completely stupid. I don't know. But that was the level of addiction and how much I wanted to do it. The next morning I'd get up, and before going to school, right at sunrise, I'd get out and I'd windsurf. And because I live close enough to the beach, I can get down there, get a quick session in, and then come back, stand under the hose, and then go to school. And so that was the beginning of a really long love affair with wind sport.
So sorry, what year was that you first got introduced to windsurfing?
That would have been 1977, I think.
Oh wow! So that was the year I was born, and you grew up on Kailua, was it?
That's right. Yeah.
So obviously Robbie Nash also grew up in Kailua. So were you guys friends then, or did you know him, or what?
I didn't know him prior to windsurfing. I mean, I knew of him, but the day that I learned how to windsurf, of course, I started just learning everything about it. Robbie was already world champion at the time, maybe even a 2-time world champ by then.
Wow!
And
wow.
Robbie's I think 2 years younger than me, and
okay.
So I obviously knew about him. And then, of course, as I was saying, there's very few people windsurfing at the time. I met him right away, and got to ride with the best. Right from the beginning. Robbie and all the elders at the time, but guys like his dad and Larry Stanley and Mike Horgan and Pat Love, Colin Perry, all these guys were guys that were really, really into it and really into trying to take this craft and make it perform more than a one design in like the Kailua type waters, which are, generally windy with surf. So that there was already a lot of like development happening there in Kailua at that time.
So when you got introduced to it in 1977, how many windsurfers were there? Like, at your beach?
Well, if you go down to Kailua Beach Park, like I said, maybe a couple of dozen, maybe. That's
well, that's not bad. That's quite a lot for so early on.
Yeah. And maybe island wide or statewide, there's probably more than that, I'm sure. it just seemed like it was just this really tight crew of guys, like and girls, like a real, just a handful. And
because I was,
I mean, one of the interesting things that was happening at the time, right when I got into it, Kailua was also a big sailing town. So like there, the Hobie fleet, the Prindle fleet, those were like really established sailing fleets. And when windsurfing came along, this is something that you didn't have to trailer to the beach. You could, put it on top of your car or drag it from your house if you live close enough. And I think windsurfing was a kind of a minor disruptor at the time. Like it was coming in, and a lot of these guys that I just mentioned had maybe some background in sailing as well. And they were starting to check out windsurfing, not just checking it out. They were the guys that were sort of fronting the charge here.
Yeah. I think it's such a fascinating part of time because, these days everything is documented with phones and it's all, what I mean? Like everything's documented. Whereas you basically lived in a time where all it basically comes down to is stories and a few scratchy videos if you're lucky. So a lot of it is basically just in legend now, isn't it? And it's I'm trying to imagine what it would be like. I was fortunate enough to go to Oahu about 5-6 years ago, and I wanted to go to Kailua just to get a sense of the place. I mean, it's, I went there to go to Diamond Head, which we'll also touch on, obviously, because Diamond Head is something that I believe you spend a lot of time at. But when I went to Kailua, it was a bit of a strange one because I have this, obviously it was famous for Robbie Nash being there. And obviously now I'm learning that you were also learning there. But, I've got this vision of just the 70s and Hawaii, which, I mean, when you go, as the first time I went 6 years ago, and Hawaii is obviously quite a built up, popular place, so I can only imagine the changes that you've seen since then. Like, I can't even really fathom what it would have been like in the 70s. I imagine Kailua was probably quite a sleepy little place, I guess. And so when I went there and I was just like, wow, this is basically one of the birthplaces of windsurfing right there. Also was able to visit the Nash store, which I believe is not there anymore, but that was interesting, meeting Robbie's brother, and it was it's a bit of it's a weird thing because nowadays Kailua, I imagine when you go down there, there's probably not even that many people even windsurfing there anymore. Would that be true, or what is it?
Yeah, if you're talking pure windsurfing, it's pretty limited. But if you're talking wind sport between windsurfing and kite surfing and wing surfing, and now with the parawing, there's still a pretty healthy wind sport crew there.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just there a couple of weeks ago, and it's alive and well. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. For sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously now there's so many more options, but yeah, no, it was really fascinating, and I in a way, you guys. I mean, I don't know of all the backgrounds because no one's got the perfect life, but in a way, kids growing up in a place like that, from an outsider's perspective, I guess it has that feeling of growing up in paradise or something. Like you're living in Hawaii, not a care in the world. I mean, I'm assuming in the 70s, I can only imagine it was I mean, what was it like in Hawaii in those days? I mean,
yeah, it was everything you're saying. Of course, it's life, and there are there are two sides to every coin. But Hawaii back then, and still is. That's why I'm still here in Hawaii. But back then, it was just, gosh, I mean, we had the ocean and Kailua Bay, which is a couple miles long, on one side, and on the other side, you had this really tight knit community. I think it sounds like quite a bit, but between Kailua and the neighboring towns, there were about 30,000 people. And of course, that's quite a few people, but it's even grown since then. But Kailua is on the windward side of the island, and then there's these just sheer Ko'olau, that's the name of the mountain range that runs the whole span of the island. that's between the windward side and the leeward side. And on the leeward side, of course, you have Waikiki and Honolulu and, you know, high rises and all this. Whereas on the east side of the island, Kailua, it was like, you know, when I was a young kid, the tallest building was the height of a coconut tree. Yeah. And, you know, it's changed since, but my family's still there and it still has the Kailua spirit. And water sports are just part of the fabric of the community. My sister is really into canoe paddling with her husband, and canoe paddling is a big thing. Surfing is a big thing. All the wind sports, sailing, diving, fishing, like it's really, you live in the ocean there.
Yeah. That's one thing I've noticed. I mean, I live in Australia, obviously, but in Hawaii, you really get that sense that the water is as important as the land, if not more so. You know, it's very much a place that everyone either lives on the beach or hangs out on the beach or is in the water. It's huge, isn't it? That's something that's probably even more so than in Australia, actually. So it's it was interesting. Yeah,
I mean, Australia's as well. It's really similar to a lot of places in Australia. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I think because Australia's, the landmass is so large, there's a lot of people also that don't like there's more options with the land, you know what I mean? With in Hawaii, you're pretty much on quite small islands, so that the ocean it's always right there. You're always close to the ocean wherever you are in Hawaii. It's something I've kind of felt. Yeah. But so and when you first got into windsurfing, what was it about it that got you hooked? You know, can you remember a particular thing about it or?
You know, I don't remember exactly what it is, but thinking back, I think one of the things that got me hooked was the freedom, because until that, you got to imagine I was into surfing where you just paddle out and you're working this zone of the ocean, generally, you know, 50 or 100 yards in either direction. And you're just sort of working that zone. And then suddenly you jump on this windsurfer and then the entire bay was mine. Like anywhere I wanted to go, it was like jumping on your bike and just being able to go out to these islands, which are another cool thing about Kailua is we have all these islands just right offshore, and you could sail out to the islands, and then you could sail over here to this part of the bay where there's a good wave, and then you could do this and that. So I think that was one of the hooks, and freedom, really, and like I said earlier too, the dynamics of it all. It was just this really cool thing. Like you could I don't mean to be too esoteric here, but like everything else that you do, like if you're surfing, you're looking at a wave, the thing comes in, you catch it. It's a tangible thing. You see it, you ride it. Same thing with snowboarding or skiing. Like you stand on a hill, you figure out what you're going to do, then you do it. Windsurfing, you're grabbing with your hands. You're grabbing onto something you can't see. You don't see the wind, but you can see the effects of it in front of you, and suddenly you're tapping into all this kind of this thing that your body really relies on a lot of its own instincts. And so it was this really multi-dimensional sport that I got into that was just captivating.
Yeah, no, I can relate to what you're saying. There's certainly something very unique about wind sports in general, and obviously in this case windsurfing, because that was pretty much the only option as far as that type of a wind sport. But it's obviously why anyone who gets into windsurfing. There's something about it that hooks you, and it is a very unique experience. So it's when you started. Well, actually, you said somebody introduced you. Do you remember who that was? Like the name of the person?
Yeah. Who was his name is Brett Vollert. He was a classmate of mine. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Good guy, surfer, friend, super talented with his hands. Like he would build all these cool things, still does. And we would hang out and he told me about it one day. And in order for me to use his windsurfer, he had to do something. So I think it was like, he said, I'm going to do my homework. You take the windsurfer, and he gave me like a 5-minute lesson. And then he sent me out on the water, and it was offshore that day. And so I basically blew out to sea, and, the whole time trying to figure it out. And I'm just blowing further and further out. And finally I kind of checked myself, and I'm like, I'm pretty far out of here. like I'm going to either have to try to swim this beast, which it was at the time, back in, or I'm going to have to figure this out. And so I just kept at it, and I figured it out. And maybe that in itself was like a huge win. And so I figured it out, and I came in, and I was like, all right, I go back out, and came back in, and it worked. And so I think literally from that day on, I think I was on a mission to get my own gear. And it wasn't long after, I think I did a deal with my parents. I saved some of my own money. They kicked in some money, and I got a windsurfer. The other hook right about that same time was the community and the people that were already doing it. And one of the things that I thought was so funny about it and great about it was that all the people that I knew that were in it were board builders, and they started making their own sails, and they started making their own booms, and like we had this community of makers, and they weren't waiting for the sport to move ahead and then go out and purchase the stuff. They were just making it themselves. And every week, every month, there was something new happening. And I was just a kid, I was 15 years old, and I was seeing all this happen around me. And so it had a big impression on me that, it's not always just a store-bought product. Like, you can actually buy it and modify it and build your own stuff. And so it kind of installed that thought in my head early on.
Yeah. What was some of the early developments that stand out where you went, oh, wow, this is, I'm not talking about into the 80s, but maybe just the early few years. Was there some development where you think, oh, wow, this is a bit of a step up, or, something that, made life easier to windsurf? Can you think of anything? Or?
Yeah, a bunch. So like, the Schweitzers had the windsurfer. That's the thing that everybody had, right? Yeah. So Hoyle, Diane, Matt, and his family, they all were out there riding the windsurfer, and there was like fleet racing, the One Design races on these. But Matt and also a lot of the guys I just mentioned were already looking ahead. They're like, hey, we want to ride waves on these things. And so they started modifying the dagger board. They had this dagger board to help you get upwind, but it was too much if you went off the wind. So they started modifying the dagger board. That was helpful. Then there was no straps on any of the windsurfers. And so I think it was Larry Stanley, I believe, maybe him and some of his guys did the first foot straps on a windsurfer. And so suddenly, like, when you come off a wave and the thing gets airborne, you just go with it. And that to me was one of the biggest immediate accessories that really made the sport progress. Pat Love started making a harness that suddenly you can go out and ride all day long in this thing. And so there was a lot of those kind of things happening. And then, of course, custom boards, because we live in a surf community. People started making custom boards. And then from that point on, the boards started getting smaller and more high performance, more capable in the surf. And then it started getting really interesting. Then I started doing that myself. So I made a little shaping room on the side of my house, and I started building boards myself.
Did you weigh the boards? Or when you made the short boards, did you have an idea of what the actual weight was? Because these days people are obsessed with the weights and things like that. Did you guys do that then too, or?
Yeah, we did. But I can't remember. But they're like, we're talking. A light board was probably like 50 pounds.
Yeah,
I mean,
wow.
You would die. I have like so many of those boards behind me in the garage, and a short board, my shortest board, the first board I made was a 8.6, and
yeah, right.
And we were talking like, until then we were riding 12 footers. So an 8.6 was like, people were like, what? No way. You can't ride that thing. But it's literally like this thick. And I had plans drawn up for a 7.6, which is what I really wanted to make. But I was like, they're like, no way. you can't even ride an 8.6. So I'm like, okay, well, the first one I should probably make an 8.6. But you could land a helicopter on it. It's like that floaty. But it's probably like 50 pounds.
Yeah, wow. Because that's the other amazing thing when you see any imagery or videos from back in those days. How you guys were able to ride that gear was remarkable in itself. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, if you're obviously comparing it to today's gear, it's I mean, at the time you wouldn't have known any better, but looking back, it's quite amazing, isn't it? It's still it was a challenge on the body and everything. So no, you did well. So oh yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but when we started riding Diamond Head, we were still riding those 12-foot boards. They're fully modified. They had straps. They had all, twin fin. They had been modified quite a bit, but those were the original boards that we rode at Diamond Head. And I don't know if you know, but the Diamond Head is a cliff, and you have to like get down the cliff to ride and then get that thing back up the cliff. It was a beast.
Yeah.
It was a beast.
That we'll get onto Diamond Head, but just quickly, when I was there, you park at the top and you walk down that the walkway that sort of goes out. Was that also the case back in those days?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Okay, it's a fair walk. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but even just to give you an example of the crew that I was running with, like these guys were, nothing was untouched. They're like, all right, I don't want to carry this thing down the cliff. So you remember how the original windsurfers had where the mast fit into the board? It was like a wedge fit.
Yeah, yeah. It's like a rectangular thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like this little wood thing that just fit, like friction fit in a slot to get it in to the board. Get the mast into the board, unlike now where you have the clip and everything. Anyway, so instead of carrying the board down, these guys would cut these PVC pipes in a U shape and then attach one of those wedge fit things and put it on the railing of that walkway down. So you didn't have to carry the whole thing. You set it on the rail, and it was like a monorail for your board, at least going down. Going back up, it was yeah. But that's the level of thought that was going into like every little thing that was happening.
Yeah. I'm really it's quite amazing because I mean, we've seen it happen again and again through the other wind sports, kite surfing, winging, foiling. It's still happening today, obviously, with other sports, but there's something just there's something so amazing when you get involved in a development of the sport. And look, do you think that with these other sports, kite surfing, foiling, winging, the actual feeling of that development, do you think it can ever be matched? Like is it the same in the modern times as it was back then, that feeling? Because the reason I say that is windsurfing was the original wind sport if you take away Hobie cats and stuff like that. So because it wasn't just about windsurfing per se, but it was just like a whole new world at the time. Whereas now, when you have a new sport like wing foiling and stuff, it's kind of like an extension of windsurfing, if you know what I mean. Like it's like, oh, well, this is just something else that's happening. Do you think that those days, like, was it a bit different to the modern times and that the feeling of that development? Does that make any sense? Like, was it something that was it, or do you think it's all sort of similar? It's just that it was a different time. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's a really good question, and I think you'll never be able to match that. I think that spirit at the early stage of windsurfing, because all that focus was on one thing. It was on this one sport. But if you think about the windsurfer itself, in and itself is kind of a hybrid thing, right? It's a surfboard and it's a sail, right? It's a sailing craft. It's a surfboard. So like these Hoyle and Drake were smart enough to mash up these two sports into this hybrid thing, right? And then from that point on, like people were coming in it from surfing, people were coming in it from sailing, people were coming in it from like hang gliding, and bringing all the knowledge that they had from these other things into that. And I recognized that as well. Like early on, I'm like, wow, there's people here from kind of all these different walks of life that are contributing to this thing that's just making it just blow up. And so when kite surfing came along, it kind of was the same thing. Kite surfing was a hybrid. It had DNA from windsurfing. It had DNA from surfing. It had DNA from wakeboarding. It had DNA from paragliding. Like, it was really kind of one of the ultimate hybrid sports. And I felt right early on just the energy being directed at kite surfing, like even before it was anything. I think, myself and Robbie and, Rafael Sauls and a lot of other, guys coming from the windsurf world saw that. And we're like, this feels a whole lot like the early days of windsurfing and the energy around all this, like, people, the curiosity and what people were thinking they wanted to do with this thing. And that's when I said to myself, I think this is going to go somewhere. I want to be a part of this too. And,
it makes me, now that you say that, it makes me actually wonder how much of your involvement with these sports was due to the enjoyment of that energy. Because when windsurfing started, it peaked and it started going down the other end, some of the fun of that, it started to fade because the energy wasn't there. So when you started feeling that energy of the kite surfing movement come up, that because of that, maybe, I don't know, you tell me, but maybe because of that feeling, this is like what it was with windsurfing, was that a big draw of not just the fact that there was, a new sport that could do other things, but just purely that energy of that development was what got you also excited? Would that be fair to say? Or
you're spot on. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're spot on. That was, if we're talking about hooks, that was like one of the big ones, for sure. One of the big ones. For me, there's usually a few, like one of them is the athletic side. Like, what can I do with this, this thing? Somebody threw this thing out at us, it was originally, Corey Rossler. And then on the other side, there was Bruno Legigno doing the inflatable kites. They created this thing, and then it sort of, it gets out into the world, and then it's like, all right, what are you going to do with this thing? So the athletic side was like, wow, okay, what can I do now? For sure, you can jump on this thing because, get air on this thing. And at the time, I wasn't even thinking it was going to be the amazing surfing vehicle that it is now. But that's always one hook. And then, of course, the other side is like, all right, it's going to develop. What does it need to become, all it can be? And that's when I really started getting into it. I started again with the boards. I started making boards under the Cabrinha label, and I was working at Nash at the time. We were all still windsurfing and still really into windsurfing when this thing was just coming into view.
Yeah. Well, we'll get onto it later because I basically was hoping to just quickly fill in these other gaps as well. So we're back to Kailua. You're a young kid. You're just obsessed with windsurfing, and then just for curiosity's sake, at what point did you befriend Robbie? Because from what I could gather from my experience from watching the videos, you guys ended up becoming good friends, basically, right? So where did that start? How did that start, that friendship?
So pretty quickly, pretty soon on, like any day I would go on the water, he would be on the water. He, like myself, was just, of course, fully addicted, and he had been at it for some years already as a very young kid. And I was just like, man, this guy's amazing. So like, first you're following him around if you can, and then suddenly you're chasing him down, or you're riding together, whatever. Then you're hanging out, and along with all the rest of the small group of people in Kailua. He went to my high school, I believe, for just a very short time before he went to a school on the other side of the island. So we weren't like schoolmates, our time was pretty much limited to on the water and social events and things like that. And of course, it wasn't until, if I'm skipping a bit ahead, once the sport was starting to turn pro, he and his family had a very strong connection with Mistral, as you know, in the early days. And his dad approached me one day and asked me if I'd be interested in also riding for Mistral. And I was just like, yeah, that is the company. And of course, that meant I would be riding Nash boards made by himself and Harold Iggy. And at the time, Gaster was also in the mix. So almost went completely into this package sponsorship deal that allowed me to hit the tour running with really good sponsorship. And of course, the backing of the Nash, family and all that was going around that as well. Harold.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of support, with Harold was making the boards. They would travel with us. If there were any problems with the equipment, we had someone who could just fix it or modify it. Yeah.
So how old were you when you got these sponsorships?
So I think that's a good question. I think Mistral would have been, I think, around either late 82 or early 83. And so if it was early 83, I would have been 22.
Okay. And where were you living then?
Prior to that, prior to that, I had a lot of local sponsorship. They were like local surf shops and, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Did in those days, because obviously there's this groundswell of energy, did you have to push hard to get sponsors, or did they kind of just come and find you? Well, back in those days, what was that like?
So it grew, as I just mentioned, like it grew kind of from this local thing. It wasn't a professional sport, but people were buying. It was a consumer sport. People were starting to buy the product. So some of the local sponsors, like one of my first sponsors was Locomotion Surfboards, and they weren't even into windsurfing at the time. They were a surf company, but they wanted to make some windsurf boards. So I got sponsored by them originally, and then a lot of the product was coming over from Europe. So it was companies like High Fly. I'm not sure when F2 got into it, but yeah. It would have been early 80s, but that's also the timing was like right when the sport just started to go pro. So everybody was pulling together their teams and who was out there. And I think a lot of it was still a pretty small sport. They knew who was performing, so they knew where to put their money.
Well, was there any sorry for all these questions, because it's probably sometimes hard to remember all the details, because we are talking, well, now it's 45, 50 years ago, some of these, 45 years ago. So it's a while now. But when windsurfing started gaining traction in Hawaii being a very surf-based land, was there any pushback from surfers, locals to this new sport? Was there any feeling of threat? Because, obviously these days, there's different tribes, and sometimes you have to manage the energy around that. I mean, back in those days, did you get any pushback from any of the hardcore surfers or anything like that?
So in the very beginning, there wasn't any. Like, windsurfing was kind of still a curiosity. It was the 12-foot boards, the big, they were like, okay, they're over there doing that. And rightfully so, we were like nowhere near anything that resembled a good wave. It wasn't until the board started getting really small and we started showing up at places like Diamond Head, then it was like, whoa, what's going on here, And windsurfers are just ripping in and out of the lineup, and you're getting maybe 15 waves or 20 waves to every one wave a surfer can catch. And so already there's already that, like, come on, and then, if you surfed, you had some empathy and you knew how to stay away from people, and, you knew what to do. If you didn't, or you were just traveling to Hawaii and you just showed up at Diamond Head or somewhere, there were a lot of guys just burning through the lineup and spraying surfers or dropping in on them or whatever. And yeah, there was some tension, and at times, I would see it go down. I'd have to like run referee or try to, do some cleanup, for the windsurf reputation after that. I don't recall any major incidents of my own, but maybe I was just lucky, or maybe it was just just because I grew up there and you sort of know how it rolls. But yeah, there was tension, and then that as the sport grew bigger and it moved to places like Ho'okipa, which is like a really defined bay. It's Ho'okipa. It's a small spot, and at one point it was like overrun with windsurfers, but that was late 70s, early 80s, and that was before it was really, and this is going to sound crazy, it was before surfing was really popular at that spot, because the whole North Shore of Maui was the windy side of the island, and there were surfers there for sure. We knew them all, but they were trying to get away from the wind. So they were Honolulu, and like as much as they could, they were trying to get to that side of the island. But let's face it, Ho'okipa is just a north-facing spot, and it is the bread and butter for, the surf community here on Maui. And so down the road, they had to enact this rule, the 10 surfer rule, which means that if there's 10 guys surfing, no windsurfing. And there was a hierarchy. So fishing is first. You can fish anywhere you want, anytime. You're providing for your family. There are no real rules when it comes to sports. Fishing, canoe paddling, all these things, windsurfing, surfing, you all had to like stay out of their way. And then surfing, and then windsurfing, and then kite surfing is further down the hierarchy. And then of course now foil boarding is like over there, like, so
a lot of layers. So we're in Kailua. You get some sponsorship with Mistral, and Gastra comes on the scene. So at this point in time, you're 22 or whatever. Had you been overseas yet, or are you just still based in Oahu? Well, yeah. Have you been doing much traveling with windsurfing?
By that time, a bit.
A little bit. Okay.
I'll tell you kind of a defining short story. So right around the 80s, I was going to Diamond Head every single day, and that was like the spot. And we were riding these really short boards that just came into the scene. Mike Waltz and Mark Paul came over from Maui one day, and they brought these small surfboards and for us to try, and we tried them. And I went to the North Shore the next day and had a shaper there. His name is Heitor Fernandez, shaped me this a 7-foot surfboard. And so we're there at Diamond Head every single day, and the surf photographer named Warren Bolster was shooting photos every day, and Darrell Wong was shooting photos. And there was already this windsurf magazine in Japan, and they were publishing all these photographs. And one day I saw a poster was being sold with my photo on it, and I was, the first 5 minutes I was like, wow, that's cool. And then the second 5 minutes I'm like, wait a second, how does this work? These guys are selling products with me on it. So I handwrote, I was a kid, I handwrote this letter to the publisher of the magazine. I'm like, hey, great photo, but you think we could share the profit of this, not knowing anything from my side. And about 5 days later, he happened to be in Hawaii at my sponsor's surf shop. And I met him, and he's like, "Hey, look," he goes, "we don't make any money off of these posters, but I can give you a ticket to Japan, and I can connect you with a sponsor there." So this is around 80. And so I'm like, okay, sounds cool. So they fly me to Japan. They connect me with this sponsor, Victory Wetsuits. And Victory's like, okay, well, yeah, I heard you're pretty good, but there's a windsurfing world championship on Okinawa Island this month. We're going to send you there and see how you do. So I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Like, that's racing. And I only really know how to ride waves. Like, I skipped the whole racing thing, right? But I'm like, okay. So they send me to Okinawa. I get there, and I had to do the trials. And Matt Schweitzer and, Mike Waltz and like all the legends are there, like, the world champs. And I get there, and I do the trials, and I make it into the main event. And then a typhoon hits, a hurricane hits, and basically shuts the event down. Like, you can't ride these things in hurricane winds at all, not even, close to it. But I had my little 7-foot board that I had brought with me. And the way these world championships work is that people are flying from all over the world, right? All the gear is there. So they just basically pack their wetsuits and show up at these events. Mm-hmm. And the one design equipment is there. So nobody had secondary gear except for, I think, Matt and maybe Mike. Anyways, this typhoon hits, and like myself and Matt and Mike, we're like the only guys on the water. And we were able to ride like until this hurricane is like really starting to get like destructive. And then we like pack it up. But it's a world championship event. So there's all this press there, and all this footage is like going back to Tokyo. And this is like, or all the cities in Japan, and this is becoming viral. So the potential sponsor calls me up, and they're like, we don't care if you do this event, just get yourself back to Tokyo. We've got like press lined up. We've got, So I'm like, really? They're like, get over here. So they fly me back to Tokyo. And as they said, they had all this, these interviews and all this stuff going on. And it was basically like, where do we want you, sign right here, and wow. So that kicked it off for me. That was really one of the biggest door openers. And it was right at that point, I was like, all right, this is something that I want to do. Like, I definitely want to do this, and I want to do this for the long run. Like, I think there's going to be something here.
So in those early days, I mean, look, we love chatting about, the sponsorships and what it was like in the old days, but so this is Victory Wetsuits you're talking about, huh? Japan. That's for you. Like, can I dare I ask, just for for curiosity's sakes, but we're talking early 80s, what did they offer? Can you tell us, like how much money was involved back in those days with the sponsorship? Like what's
gosh, I think the starting pay for them was, I think it was a couple thousand a month.
Okay. And back in those days, that was probably pretty good, right? I mean, right. Yeah.
And but they, fortunately for me, like they already kind of knew the game. So they were sponsoring Mark Richards at the time, who was, I think, 4-time
MR,
world champ. Yeah, MR. And so they knew how to, work with people outside of their country, and they knew what the value of a good rider was. And I'm not putting myself, I was just starting. I mean, that was literally my entrance to the game. But that's what it was.
Yeah, but look, obviously you may be a couple of years behind some of the other guys, but at the end of the day, you were all just starting, really, wasn't it? I mean, your sport was that young, so it was all quite fresh, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was already kind of reinventing itself, if that not a complete reinvention, but it was evolving so quickly that that maybe that in itself that typhoon and what happened there was sort of a shift in the mindset from that. Okay, there's that type of competition, one design, tactical racing, and then there's this guy over here who's just riding a typhoon, like he's free riding, and he's riding waves, and he's jumping, and all this other stuff. That it's the same sport. It basically all the function is the same, but you're doing something completely different with it.
Yeah.
And I think that started that mindset, like, okay, there's going to be all these different categories, these different genres within windsurfing.
Yeah, I'm trying to appreciate that, because I think I've heard you say in other podcasts before, but windsurfing started as like a sailing sport, obviously on flat water. But that jump from sailing to waves or ocean sailing, that is quite interesting in on itself, isn't it? Because we take it for granted now that that's just what you do. But to open people's minds up and go, hold on a second, this thing is just like a whole other craft. That must have been quite amazing to be in that time, actually, now that I think about it. Because I think it's very hard for any young person to fully grasp what it was back like, because these days action sports are everywhere. But in those days, there was not that many options to do exciting sports like that. No, it wasn't it. So it must have made a huge impact. Like that's why I think when they said, "Oh, the press are there, get back over here," because it was probably blowing people's minds at the time or something.
Yeah. I mean, if I wasn't the one doing it and I was sitting on the sidelines, it would have blown my mind.
Yeah.
We never really knew the limits, and still don't. I don't think anybody knows the limits. There are no limits. If I watch what the guys are doing today, but at the time, we really had no idea. The big move at the time in 1980 was the duck jibe. That's what it was.
That's still a good move now.
Yeah. But I mean, to pull one off, people would it would separate the pros from the AMs, that was the move.
That's how I feel when I do one now, Pete, when I do a duck job. I still feel like I'm a pro. But wow, that's a really, I mean, there must be so many stories from back in then, and hopefully we can uncover some of them. But just going back a step again, but I wanted to touch on Diamond Head, because that was obviously a pretty big part of your journey. So who was do you know who the first person was to sail Diamond Head?
Wow, I don't know.
Okay.
But I think it was a group of guys, and it could be any one of these people or all of these people. It could be Larry Stanley, Mike Horgan, could be Robbie, it could be Rick Nash, Pat Love. Like I said, it could be anyone or all of them. I remember seeing early photos before I ever wrote it. And these guys. But I do remember going with all those names I just mentioned out to the North Shore and riding a spot called Turtle Bay very early on. This would have been late 70s. And when I say riding, I say that kind of loosely. We were probably riding swells at the time. I was, maybe, and I was just getting into the sport. But guys were already starting to push in and try to figure out, okay, what can we do with this? And one of the things that drives innovation is when you quickly figure out what you can't do with it. And that's what you say, okay, this needs to change. When you get your ass handed to you and you're not able to do what you want to do, then you're like, okay, now I gotta fix something.
Yeah, okay, I didn't know that about Turtle Bay, because that's obviously a pretty. I haven't been there. I've been to the North Shore. I didn't see Turtle Bay, but that's a pretty well-known surf spot now, right?
Well, not really. It's the bay where it was called the Kui Lima at the time. It's changed hands so many times now. It's the only hotel on the North Shore, just by Kahuku, right at that point.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. And so, and Diamond Head, that was basically the Mecca before Maui was. Was that true?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was and that, from what I can gather, it kind of pretty much was the original wave hotspot for windsurfing, was Diamond Head. That was the breeding
Yeah.
ground.
You're probably right about that. There was Diamond Head, but also Backyards, right about the same time.
Oh,
That
right.
was,
Okay.
and Backyards is a much more critical wave than Diamond Head. And you got, Craig Yester, and there was a guy named Tom Peach, and oh gosh, Brian, and there was just like a ton of guys, Wendell Payne, and yeah, there were a lot of guys that were riding the North Shore at the same time as we were riding Diamond Head.
Wow. So they were using like literally the big boards and the whole thing on those heavy waves.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
God. That's gnarly.
But it changed really quick. Like as soon as Mike and Mark Paul came to Diamond Head with the 7-footers, those were like the smallest boards I had seen until that date. And everybody just ran out and started making like short boards. From that point on, then it really stepped up, and we were able to sail outside of a place like Phantoms on the North Shore and tag some pretty good sized surfers.
You may have mentioned it, Pete, and sorry if I'm straining your brain here, but who was the first person to develop the shortboard? Was there a name or somebody that is credited with that, or?
The shortboard, like I don't know at what point it's considered short. I give Mike the credit, Mike Waltz, for actually taking a surfboard and putting a mast on it, like just a regular surfboard. And it was a 7-foot board. It was a pipeline board, 7 foot, completely zero volume. But if there's wind, you could get up and ride and just rip the heck out of, any little wave.
That's tiny. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
And the mast was about like this, like probably this far from the nose on a 7-foot board. The mast was probably like 6 feet up.
I've seen the pictures. It's hard to imagine how that even worked. What about the prices of gear? That's a big topic, obviously, just the price of gear and everything. Back in those days, I'm assuming it wasn't that cheap, was it? I mean, if you want to get into windsurfing back in those days, was it very accessible price-wise, or was it still a big investment for a lot of people?
It was still a pretty big investment. And when you talk about earlier, you had a question about the tension between surfing and windsurfing. There wasn't really, in the beginning, tension. And that was largely because a lot of surfers, including myself, like you're used to having just a board, maybe a leash, some wax, that's it. And you're out on the water. Windsurfing, suddenly you had all this gear, and all that gear costs money. And so a lot of people who were like, watermen, surfers, they were just like, all right, that's too much to think about right now, or, too expensive or what. And I remember when I started making custom boards, I was charging, I forget what it was. Probably at the time it was maybe $350 a board or something. And I had a guy come from Europe, and he's just like shocked, that it was so inexpensive. And he's like, you gotta raise your prices immediately. And, and so that's when, the industry was more driving the price level and driving it up.
Okay. And when you were in Diamond Head, because in the video Angle of Attack, I don't know if you remember, but you said something like, we sail there every day. So did you move from Kailua to that area or something? Because it's a little bit of a drive to get from Kailua to Diamond Head. Is that what happened? You moved around there?
No. I lived in Kailua. Actually, what I did do one summer was I rented a room in the house of the woman who was painting all of our boards. She worked for Nash. She was freelance, but she worked for Nash and she worked for some other brands as well. Her name's Jeannie Chesser, and her son is Todd Chesser, who you probably remember. He's the surfer.
I don't know the name. Sorry.
Watch the Momentum Generation, and he's he's one of the guys from that era. In fact, he's the guy that really inspired, and Kelly and Shane and all these guys. And he was off on tour or traveling and a whole summer, and I rented his room at his mom's house, and just so I could, if I wanted to stay and ride 3 days in a row, I would be right there. It was just something different.
Wow!
But I kept my place in Kailua.
Okay. Well, I mean, I was fortunate enough to sail Diamond Head, and again, going there was a trip because I had seen the old videos of 12-foot long boards jumping the waves there. So to finally get there and actually ride it was like going into almost like a living museum or something. It was kind of weird experience. It's actually a fun spot. Like it's a beautiful spot, isn't it? Like the water's nice color. Yeah. You've got the obviously Diamond Head right there. One thing that sort of spun me out about Diamond Head was, I mean, it's obvious to you, but it wasn't so much obvious to me. But that the fact that Waikiki and Honolulu, it's right there. Like it's there's Diamond Head, and just around the corner is civilization. I had this sort of feeling that it was a bit more away from all that, but you're right in the thick of it there. It was sort of interesting, and all the reefs, they just sort of stretch all up and down the coast, and you can literally just pick a reef. Like there's lots of actually options as well, isn't it? It's pretty cool.
What's considered Diamond Head has probably 15 different waves.
Yeah.
There's
little
channels and breaks and like little A-frames, and then some, longer waves. But it's actually a lot more. Well, there's one spot right at Diamond Head that's more of a deep water spot, so it can hold swell when it gets bigger. That's the beauty of the islands that are to the west of Maui. All the older islands are they're older, they're more established, the reefs are more established. There's a lot of fringing reefs, whereas when you go in the direction of Maui, the newer islands have less and less of those reefs. So there's not as many surf spots.
Yeah. Obviously yourself, Robbie, probably some of the biggest names that came out of that spot of that era. Is there anyone else that you can think of at that time that we may not know about, that were also, was setting a bit of the benchmark for wave sailing and so forth?
Wow, gosh, there's so many, but Craig Lester and then some of the kids that are a lot younger than me, like Mark Angulo and Rush Roundel. I think they're both about 10 years younger than me. Come on, those guys, like once they got into it, they started doing some really amazing stuff, and
But Rush and Mark, were they at Diamond? Were they at Diamond Head?
They would ride Diamond Head, but they had the North Shore right in their backyard, and so they would probably ride there more. But the thing about Diamond Head and the North Shore is that they're seasonal. So in the winter, the North Shore breaks. The summer, Diamond Head breaks.
Yeah,
that's how it works.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to work this timeline out. So basically, we're still in the sort of early 80s. And then at what point did you move to Maui, and B, go on this sort of world tour, which I believe at the time was the WSMA, which is the World Sailboards Manufacturers League or something like that?
Association.
So, association. Sorry. And then I'm getting confused with the WSL. So tell us about that sort of time frame. So, when did did this all happen around the same time where you went to Maui and then went on that tour, or what? How did that work?
Yeah, so I was bouncing to Maui from Oahu for events and there started to be these little small events, and then O'Neill finally came in 1981. O'Neill came in with some serious prize money, and they put on like the first O'Neill Invitational, and I came over to Maui for that, and I ended up winning it, and that was like kind of kickoff of professional windsurfing competition. I mean, there had been prize money prior to that, but that was like the first one with, I think that was the first surfing wave event that had real money. I think there was an event in Japan, a racing event that actually had really good money, prize money, but prior to that. But this was the beginning, 1981, and by 1983, I think that was the birth of the WSMA. Again, don't quote me on that, but okay. By 83, I was on the road and traveling to events, and yeah.
So when you went to O'Neill in 81, had you sailed at Ho'okipa much up until that point, or?
Yeah, I had. But it wasn't my backyard spot, so it was like I would come over and I would sail it. So I had to figure it out, yeah. But I was coming often enough, and I had ridden it often enough that I had figured it out a bit.
Because it was only a few years before that basically Mike Waltz. It was Mike Waltz that essentially kind of discovered Ho'okipa, right?
Yeah.
So that was only a few years before, wasn't it?
That would have been late 70s. I did it. Yeah, I did a trip in the late 70s to, I think it was like 78 or 79, to stay at Mike's place, and he was living on the west side, and he was teaching windsurfing on Ka'anapali Beach over by the Sheraton. And I don't know if you know that area, but it's offshore wind. It's like the most beautiful like beach for swimming because the wind is offshore. I didn't know how it worked for him, but that's what he was doing. But he told me then that he and Fred had this spot on the other side of the island. He's like, it would be like postcard perfect where we were on Ka'anapali Beach. And he goes like light wind, beautiful water. And he'd be like, it's 25, 30 knots over there today, right now. Like as we speak. Yeah. He's like, it's got its own thing happening over there. And so I don't think it was that trip, but like on the next trip I came over and I wrote it, and I was like, all right, you're not joking. This is the real deal.
Yeah. I mean, just even that alone, like we're living in a world now where you can go on Google Earth and pretty much look at every spot around the world on your computer. But again, we talk about those magic moments. I can only imagine, you're living on a tropical paradise island, and around the corner is one of the world's best windsurfing breaks that basically just lays there like a treasure or something. Just that alone is so exciting, isn't it? Because as a windsurfer, it's always a bit also about the search. Oh, where else can we windsurf? You can do on that, and you guys literally have that right there, and you're the first ones there. I can only imagine what that, I don't know, I can try to imagine, but it must have been just a magical time. Like in a way, is it kind of, when you look back at those days, it probably almost feels like it's some kind of weird movie that, it happened, but it's almost too good to be true or something. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Uh-oh. I lost you. That was interesting, wasn't it? Got Tilo here. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, it was going so well. Don't worry, I'm sure he'll be back. But I love hearing. It's windy on Maui. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this as well. I'm really trying to delve into the sort of good old days, because I feel like that is something that really needs to be documented in windsurfing. There's so many stories, and at the end of the day, we're probably only going to be scratching the surface, but we'll try and get as much of it as we can. Andy, actually, this is a good opportunity. Oh, here he is. Pete, I'm not sure. Was that me or was that you? What happened there?
I have no idea, but it's
Oh,
possible it's me because this happens here.
oh, okay. No, no, it's all good because I just had a bit of an interaction with the audience, and everyone's still here. No one's left because they're actually they're super into this. So it's good to see you came back, mate. Just on that, I was just in the middle of about to ask the audience question. If you have any questions for Pete, please write it in the comments here. So where we were at, I was basically just saying that it's quite an amazing story. The fact that you guys are on Maui and were the first to sail Hoa Keep It, because I can only imagine that would have been a magical time, and it's something that's very hard to replicate in this day and age. So you're extremely fortunate, I believe, to have lived through that period. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, believe me, I'm well aware of my good fortune and how much luck has been involved in a lot of this in terms of timing and proximity and all those things. It's just, to be at the age I was when all of this was happening. If it happened, a few years later, I might have taken a different path. I was just getting out of high school. And of course you're at that crossroad where, higher education is looking at you and you're looking at it and you're like, that's an option. But then I knew where I was on the world scene in terms of windsurfing, but the sport wasn't a professional sport right as I was getting out of high school. So I made a deal with my parents. I said, hey, listen, just let me pursue this for a year or two and just see what happens. We have no idea, but I don't want to miss this opportunity. And that's when it just blew up. And I was actually swept up.
Sorry, I was actually, as you said that, I was just thinking, I did mean to touch on that too, but your parents, obviously defining, as to who you are as a person, but what did they think about the windsurfing? Did they ever get into it, or was it just yourself in the family?
Yeah, just myself.
Okay.
What's pretty interesting is my dad was the one who pushed me into my first wave surfing. But my dad was a pilot, both for commercial airlines, and he was also a fighter pilot. And so he had his toys too, and
yeah, right.
And our sport together, my dad and I, we used to ride dirt bikes, and my brother and my cousin and the group. But yeah, they weren't water people. I was kind of pretty much one of the only ones in my family, aside from my brother, who surfed at a young age and then got out of surfing and got more into like fishing and other things that Hawaii delivers. And my sister was a canoe paddler, is still a canoe paddler. Oh. So yeah, in terms of these surf sports, I was really the only one.
That's interesting. You said your dad. Oh, all right. Go on.
I had a ton of support from all of them, and especially my parents. They think they're just more curious about it all. I mean, think about it. Like, they all went the traditional route of careers and everything, and here was this kid looking at something that was just so foreign to them at the time, and to all of us. Like, who was going to make a living being a professional windsurfer? Like, what is that even? What does that look like? What is, is there a safety net? Of course not. There's none of that. And the thing I was well aware of was that I knew that this thing was going to take me down the road for a number of years, which, okay, it's never too late to go to school, but I was clearly going to be out of the age by the time I jumped off this thing that I would either be a very older college student or, I would have to do something else. So once I got into it, I was like, all right, I really want to do this for the long run. And I'm going to do everything in my power to try to figure out how this works. Like what's the mechanics of this whole game,
How exciting. And while we were just getting back on track, there was a question here from Andy Wood. because we talked about the 1981 O'Neill event in Ho'okipa. He's just curious about the prize money in those days. Do you remember what you got when you won the event then? Or
Yeah. So when I won the O'Neill, I got 6,000 for first place.
Wow.
That was in 81. And again, I can't remember whether it was before or after, but I remember everybody went, even people like myself who wasn't into racing. We did this racing event in Japan, and first place was 15,000. And that would have been sometime around that time. Robbie won it. They handed him $150 bills.
That's awesome.
It was wild. I know. Crazy.
And look, just to put that in perspective too, do you remember, like on Maui in 1981, if you can remember this, if you wanted to go and buy I don't know, simple little house or something on Maui in 1981, what do you think the price would have been back in those days for that? Because I'm just trying to put in perspective what $6,000 means. Because you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Could you have a guess at that? Or
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, in 87, I bought a house in Maui for $175,000, which at the time that's 87, and people were like, "I can't believe you would spend that much money on a house." 175. You could buy beachfront for like $250 back in the early 80s or less.
Okay, but like, okay, yeah. So I mean, 6,000. I mean, that's 87, but 81, it probably would have even been a fair bit cheaper again, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Wow. So basically, when you started earning this sort of money, $6,000 was that was a good motivator to keep going, wasn't it? You're probably thinking, oh, I can actually do something with this. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But to be clear, like the money was great. It's always a factor. You need it to attend events. You need it to, live. But I was going to do this thing no matter what. Like it was. Yeah. I was just that hooked. But of course.
That's cool, man. That's cool. And I told Pete just before we started this, and in case you guys are wondering, I'm wearing this bright yellow top. This is actually from the 80s. So I got given this as a kid. It says Oakley on it, and I've kept it in my cupboard. I never wear the thing. I thought, I've got Pete Cabrinha. We're talking about the 80s, so I'm going to wear this today. So this is actually period correct for this podcast. This is the real deal. So going back, okay, so now we're in Maui. You've won the O'Neill. I want to hear a bit about the WSMA tour. Before it was the PBA and now the PWA. What was that like? Because again, Ben and I and others waxed lyrical about the good old days when you're treated like rock stars or something. Like, give us a sense of what it was like back in those days as much as you can, because there's a lot of people that might be listening to this that really don't know much about it, like that period. Can you give us an idea about all that? So
the WSMA was largely born in Europe, and the name kind of says a lot about it. It's the World Sailboard Manufacturers Association. So it was a group of manufacturers who got together and said, okay, we're going to organize this professional sport of windsurfing, and we're going to get sponsorship, and we're going to, run a tour and everything. And so a lot of these guys had experience in other professional sports. There was, F1, there was ski events, there was like all this stuff happening. And so they're like, windsurfing is growing so big, we see it as being like, gonna move into that realm at some point. And so they started getting sponsorship for these events, and of course the windsurf industry was also growing so fast, it was very healthy, and so the manufacturers were pouring money into it as well. And so the manufacturers started assembling their teams and striking out on these tours. And the thing is, especially across Europe, but it was happening around the world, is that coincided with something in advertising where, like, a lot of the tobacco companies couldn't advertise in the magazines anymore. They couldn't advertise on TV in a lot of places. And so these tobacco companies were sitting on mountains of cash that they needed to spend. And so they could spend it by sponsoring windsurfing events, let's say. And so they did that for, the tour was largely funded in a lot of ways by sports drinks or just, drinks in general, soft drinks and tobacco. Mm-hmm. And even to the point where when the agencies that would regulate advertising said, oh, well, now you're advertising at these windsurfing events, a lot of these tobacco companies found a loophole and they said, okay, we're gonna start a travel company using the same brand name as our tobacco company. So Peter Stuyvesant,
I remember that. Yeah.
Travel, which is Peter Stuyvesant Tobacco, but now it's a travel company. And they had to operate as a legitimate travel company in order for that to happen. And so that just continued on. And so these events were super well funded. They were super well organized. And as a writer, we were on the receiving end of a lot of that great organization and funding, like they, for example, would, fly us to these events. You would arrive at the airport. They'd hand you the keys to your car, which was of course sponsored by an either Mercedes or Audi. And sometimes your name was like painted on the side of the car. I mean, it was like that kind of situation. They would take your gear in a van separate from the car that they gave you, and they would take it to the event. When you got to the event, they had every team had this huge area, and in the area had like heated rooms because it was across the world, of course. They had this area that was for sail repair. They had an area for board repair. Sometimes they had medical teams if you needed massage or if you got injured. It was very well done. It was amazing. And the crowds saw all that. They said, okay, this is a serious sport, and they would just love it. They would buy into this. I mean, they would just come to the events by the tens of thousands of people everywhere from, northern Germany all the way down to the south of France. And of course, same thing in Asia and in other parts of the world. But it was largely a European tour, and it was amazing. It was amazing. But also things were moving so fast at the time that you would start events with one set of equipment. And if your sail company came out with a better product midway through the thing, they'd swap you out and you'd have like the latest, quiver of sails for the second half of the event.
Wow.
It was pretty incredible.
It's crazy. Yeah. Because it was just the perfect storm, wasn't it? There's a few things going on. You had a new sport that was exploding. So obviously a groundswell of public interest, big sponsorship money. You had all these factors all happening at the same time, isn't it? So it just exploded in a way. I think I had a sense of, my family's Dutch, and but I grew up in Australia. But I was sent as a child to visit my family in the early '80s, and my uncle had a windsurf shop in the Netherlands, and I still have a memory of walking into this shop, but. It's hard to fully remember because I was a young child, but I just had this real sense that it almost seemed like where I was, every second car had a windsurfer on top or something. Like it was just this massive thing. I even remember walking into a supermarket and they were selling windsurfers in the supermarket. I specifically remember that. I remember walking in and like you'd walk in the supermarket and there'd be like a little specials kind of thing area, and there was just like a big longboard with a sail there as you walk into the super. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of bizarre, but so I can only imagine what it must have been like in those days. It was kind of odd.
Yeah, I mean, it was so much more than the sport itself. It became this. It became this symbol. It became this lifestyle. Windsurfing represented this lifestyle that I think didn't exist in any mainstream form in Europe until then. You know, people were surfing. People have been surfing already for forever, but that was happening, of course, in pockets along the coast of France and even parts of the Netherlands and you know, along the North Sea, but they never had this mainstream surf sport. And that's why, I mean, till this day, windsurfing in Europe is still called surfing in some places. And so that they adopted this thing as their summer sport, and they went all in, and it was a lifestyle, and it became like this status symbol. And this is going to sound really crazy, but there are places parts of Europe where it was such a status symbol that people would get the right boards on top of their car, put the logos on the side of the car, just so that on the rail, so that, I mean, and drive around, just to let everybody know who you are and what sport you're doing. You know, it's and it exploded. There are places like Lake Garda that had thousands of windsurfers, and I don't know if you know how it works there, but like they have a wind that blows down the lake in the morning, midday it dies completely, like oily, glassy, and then the afternoon it blows the opposite direction. And when it glasses off midday, there would just be windsurfers. You could like literally walk from board to board across the lake. Like it was that many people.
Wow.
It's wild.
Back in those days, did you have any sense of where this was going? Because if it exploded so crazy, did you guys think at the time, oh, this is just a gravy train that's going to go on for decades? Or was there any sense that this was going through an explosion, but it may come off the other end? Or like, did you have any of that kind of, what was any of that sort of thinking?
I had no doubt in my mind that the sport was going to live on forever. In some form or another. I had no doubt about that. As far as the professional side of the sport, there were early signs of a change. And I'll give you one example. So I had been sponsored by an American company, a clothing company in America called OP. And OP was at the time one of the big brands. And windsurfing didn't have a lot of competition at the time for like extreme sports. You know, there was surfing and there was windsurfing, but there wasn't a lot of other ones. There was winter sport, there was skiing, but OP wasn't really into it. But all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we're going to take some of our budget. We're going to take it over here to snowboarding. And snowboarding was suddenly this new kind of skate inspired winter sport that was really blowing up. And that was, I think, the first indication that now it's got some competition. There's other things happening other than windsurfing. And that was probably late 80s. And then that period from the late 80s to sort of the early mid 90s was that transition. That's when everything really started to transition, and the events, you know, the professional windsurfing tour changed organizations a couple of times, and things did change.
Out of all the competitions that you went to back in those days, or the 80s especially, what was there one that particularly stood out for you as your favorite, or something that, I don't know, was the biggest and best, or anything like that?
Well, all the ones in Hawaii, the ones at Hokipa sort of carried the most prestige. If you won the Aloha Classic, or if you won the O'Neill, or if you won the Maui Grand Prix, like any of those just had this huge. But there was also very good prize money and very good bragging rights at really any of the events in Europe or in Japan.
So back in that,
if there was anyone the ones in Maui were always really special for sure. But I really, you don't get 30,000 people on the beach in Maui. You get that in in Holland, you get that in France, you get that in Germany, and there's something cool about that. Like there's some good energy, gets you really pumped up to compete.
Yeah, yeah. It's super hard to imagine now 30,000. I mean, in some cases, was it true to say that I'd heard reports that was up to 100,000 people? Is that true? I mean, maybe I was over the whole event period, but I don't know. I just heard some stories of this sort of numbers.
Yeah, I don't know. I
don't
don't know how to judge crowds once they
Yeah,
get to be
yeah,
guys, but
sure.
But the thing that was as impressive as the size of the crowd was just how into it they were. So like if you go to an event up in northern Germany, for example, in Zilt, Germany, you know, it doesn't get windy there unless the weather's pretty bad. Like there's a front, it's going to bring wind. Everybody knows it's going to be windy, let's say this weekend or on these days, and they come out in force and they're in it. They're like on the beach, sometimes in the rain, in freezing cold, like wind chill, and we're there too. We're competing, but they're super hardcore fans, and they stick it out, and they're there for it. And seeing that also was a lot of motivation for us to compete as well. You know, like if they're willing to stick this out, we're going to put on a show. You know, we're going to give them what they're here for.
Back in, like, obviously in the sport of windsurfing, Robbie Nash is synonymous with that period of time and is kind of, you know, the king of windsurfing, so to speak. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, but the impression I got, because I was young, and this is all, I guess, just me trying to put pieces together, but Robbie was kind of the king, but you were right there in the mix, sort of fighting with him in a lot of events, and obviously sometimes beating him and winning and so forth. But did you were friends, but did you end up having much of a rivalry in these competitions? Like, did you butt heads much at all, or were you all pretty amicable during this time?
I mean, we never butted heads to the point that it was, you know, contentious. Like, you know, it was definitely an interesting dynamic, and I think it'd be for anybody. Like, we were on the same teams. Many times we were traveling together in the same car, you know, staying at the same hotel. We were together so much, and yeah, he was already very well established, and I was somebody who was really fighting for my own world title as well. And yeah, it was tough. And it made me a better competitor because he was so good, and he had such a like charismatic way to ride that the judges really, really just bought, you know, they really were into his style. And in order to beat him, you had to beat him by 150%. Like you couldn't just sneak past him. You had to beat him. And so when I did beat him, it was, you know, it was hopefully convincing enough. But yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting dynamic, and you know, he'd have great days, I'd have great days, and you know, it's a zero-sum game sometimes, you know. Yeah,
it's quite hard to look to search online at some of those early days in windsurfing because you don't get a lot of information. But did you actually end up winning a world title through this period, or?
Yeah, in wave performance, 1985. I was world champion.
Wow! Oh, fantastic! Wow, that's amazing. Oh, that's actually, I didn't know that. So that's super cool. Andy's asking the question: were the events televised live? You know, obviously no internet or YouTube or anything.
They were definitely televised. Whether they were live or not, I don't think so. And I say that only because the nature of windsurfing, it's like you can't say, okay, the event's going to be on at 2:00 in the afternoon on this day. They happen whenever the wind happens, and you could never schedule a whole, TV schedule around a windsurfing event.
Yeah.
A lot of times, maybe bits of it were live on news, or they would jump into programs at times, but yeah, you would never get an entire event live.
Yeah,
but they would film entire events and create shows that would come on after, edited and condensed into a certain time.
And during this period,
to see it. Yeah. So they definitely got it televised, but not live.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously you mentioned, 1981, you won $6,000. So by 1985, what was the prize money then if you won some of these big events? You remember?
Yeah, I think they were around, gosh, this is tough. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
I think they were around 15 per event, not event, but per category. So like when you would do these events on the World Cup, there were always three. There was racing, slalom, and wave performance. And so if you did well in all three, you could take home some pretty good money. I did all three events for a while, and at some point I just shed the racing, both the slalom and the course racing, and I just did wave performance.
Okay. Yeah.
I was really I was horribly slow. I could not. I felt like I was dragging an anchor. And I had tactics. Wow. I had the chess game, but I just couldn't. I had no speed.
The board speed.
But get me on a wave, and that was my
get you in a typhoon. So what? Just again to get a sense, because these days being a professional windsurf is it's not an easy game. But back in those days, I assume if you were, I don't know, top 10, top 20 or whatever, you could actually make a good living to support yourself and potentially create a life for yourself, right? I mean, like how many windsurfers back in those days could actually make enough to make a living? There was the top 20, 30. I mean, did you have a sense of that? Or,
yeah, I mean, 30 for sure, making a living. Yeah. Making a great living. There was probably, I don't know. I guess it's all how you define it. Some people were just paying the bills, and some people were doing quite well. I think everybody in that era did okay.
They did all right. Yeah.
In some countries, it was definitely easier. Like I think France, they have a pretty big sailing federation, and they really put a lot of support behind their athletes. I think if you were in France, like getting sponsorship and endorsements and these kind of things was probably a lot easier than it was in the US. Windsurfing in the US was considered very fringe. Surfing was I think doing far better than windsurfing even through that period. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say, but during the 80s, basketball, like all the ball sports were just like, those were the ones that were selling, cereal and aftershave and like all those things, right? To the mainstream. And windsurfing, even as exciting as it was and as dynamic as it was not something that they would get athletes and have them endorse their product. They would feature it in advertising because it was but they could go pay almost anybody to go jump a wave or do something. They weren't really getting the athletes to endorse versus Europe, where that was a factor.
Now you windsurfed because you loved it. When you started doing this tour and the competitions, did you were you really enjoying that, or did that sort of started to make it a bit, took some, yeah?
No, it was exciting. It was 1,000%. I loved it. And I'm not saying it was easy. It was actually, there were times where it was really tough. As I said earlier, like what I found out quickly was that, where all these events were happening, were in very cold locations. And, here's this kid from Hawaii who's, never been colder than 40 degrees, suddenly just in extreme weather and having to like compete at the highest level. And so I had to get used to that. Competition days, I'd have huge anxiety about the event, and sometimes it worked in my favor. It'd make me rise to the occasion, and sometimes it would get the best of me. But overall, I loved it. And if I think of the alternative, I would have been in school somewhere, yet I had a front row seat to, the university of the world, basically. I was getting flown around and operating in these different lands and these different cultures. And so, yeah, it was all good.
Yeah.
Zero regrets. And one thing that I was also very interested in while I was doing all that was the development and the marketing and how this all worked. And so I was constantly, in touch with the companies that I was sponsored by, and getting deeper and deeper involved in what they were doing. And just first, just trying to understand it. And then secondly, actually being in a position where I could provide input and help design and help market and et cetera, et cetera. So that sort of set me up pretty well for when I got out of the windsurfing industry.
Yeah, because I think that's a good point you make also about the development, because look at a picture of windsurfing in 1981 and then look at a picture of windsurfing in 1987, and it's quite a lot different. Like we're talking triangle sails to actually modern batten sails with a pretty modern shaped sail that's pretty familiar today. That in that 5 or 6 year period, there was just light years of change going on, wasn't it? Like just radical. Yeah. That's
100%.
Yeah, and you're in the thick of it. So
and the competition was so fierce that the cream just rose to the top quickly. And we're able to benefit from all that progress.
Yeah. It's cool too that you were associated with some brands like Gastra. I find such an iconic brand. Just that the branding of the of what do they call that? It's a Dutch. The logo is like a Dutch. It's a Dutch bridge, in a town called Snake.
Yeah, I've been there. It's in. Is it in Snake?
Snake.
Holland?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Oh, so you've actually stood on that bridge or the gate they call it. Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? I've been there too.
Super cool.
Yeah. It's just that heritage. Yeah.
I have all these Gastra, shirts, and I had thrown them out a while back. And the other day, my daughter, who's like 23, gonna be 23, had one on. I'm like, "Where'd you get that?" She's like, "Oh, I snagged it when you were getting rid of it."
Oh, really? Yeah. But they're such iconic brands. They had such a strong image and a sense of history. And that's when I think of Pete Cabrinha. I just think of those Gastra sails. And that actually also brings me to. I have to ask this for my personal thing, but the video that I remember you by a lot is that angle of attack video. It's a video. If you haven't seen it, like I said before, go check it out on YouTube. But there's a good part in it where you and Robbie go to Fiji. I mean, can you tell us anything about that time, or something maybe interesting that I might not have seen in the video? Or
I don't know if there's anything that you would not have seen in the video, but that was a great time. And that again was a point in time where it kind of showed that there was this whole other freestyle, whatever you want to call it, this whole other side to the sport outside of competition. Like you can go with your buddies on a surf trip and discover this place. And we didn't discover Fiji, although that we went on that trip soon after one of our earlier trips, which was one of the early, Namotu trips. But yeah, it opened up the door to what would become this whole free ride element.
Yeah. Because it just seemed to me in that video that you and Robbie had such a nice friendship. You were joking around a lot, and it was all very relaxed. It was just the whole lifestyle. It was there was something. It was actually a really good video. To this day, I still consider it one of the best windsurfing videos made. It was just the way windsurfing was presented. It was presented in this sort of dynamic way, and yet it had a nice energy about it, And I remember, like, there's a scene in the video where Robbie's climbing a coconut tree, and he sort of throws a coconut down, and you go, "Oh, I think you called him Duke or something. Oh, Duke, you killed that fish," or something, like, or something. I don't know. It was just kind of funny. Do you remember that? Yeah. And then the other part I like in it is where you guys are. Honestly, I watched that video 100 times as a kid, but the part where you were like, there's a boat and there's a camera on a boat, and you and Robbie are just doing like jibes and transitions and stuff. Like, you're just sailing in some kind of on a flat water spot, just doing little tricks and stuff, little freestyle moves and stuff. And that was a super cool, like, you don't see that much in the winds. It's different now. It's just different. It's super cool. I highly recommend anyone to check that video out. It's super cool. Now, obviously I could speak to you for days and days about your time on the tour, and we've only got so much time. But so obviously we've gone through that period. Sounds like it was an amazing experience. And then, at what point did you end that career on that tour? Or when did that happen?
Yeah, so it was kind of it wasn't like I made an announcement one day and I said, I'm stopping, the tour. It was like this transition out of it, but it was a slow transition. So 85, I was world champ. 86, I was fifth place. And by 87, I was already like, okay, so I had been doing the tour pretty straight for about 6-7 years. And I'm like, I gave it a good thought. I was like, okay, am I going to be, what's my game here? Am I going to be going after this multi-world title thing, or the sport is still really healthy and really robust, and it's pushing out into other areas of the world that I hadn't been? Should I jump off the tour and start exploring a little bit? And I had a good long talk with my sponsors, and we came up with a plan that I was going to do a lot more promotional work in these emerging markets, which turned out to be one of the best things for me. So I was fortunate that I could still be invited to certain events, especially the ones here in Maui and such. But then I was able to break out into like Eastern Europe and, Asia. And I maintained my sponsorship probably for another 12 years after I stopped competing in a really good way. They were really supportive of me. And part of that reason was because it went into this hybrid form. So I stopped competing. I was doing all this promo work. And then my friends and I got back into surfing in a pretty big way. And we started doing something that was also very interesting for our sponsors, which was this toe surfing. And so at that point, I was windsurfing, I was doing this toe surfing, and the sponsors just suddenly had like this afterlife, and it kept them really interested in what I was up to for a long time. So yeah, I didn't just stop windsurfing. It just slowly turned into this surfing thing, and then suddenly I had all this energy in all these other areas, like the toe surfing and the strap surfing and the kite surfing came along. And at one point, it was just literally impossible to do them all on a high level that I started phasing out certain things and putting my energy into other things.
Yeah, because that's actually been, I listened to a few podcasts with you, and that's often a big talking point, is this period where you started getting into the strap crew and the whole Jaws thing. And then you ended up at some point riding the biggest Jaws wave, which I think became a Guinness World Record or something like that. So you went left at Jaws, and so this is incredible transformation. You know, you're obviously a very talented waterman. You just go from windsurfing, and next thing you know, you're riding the biggest waves in the world. So there's an interesting transition there for you too. Yeah, it's certainly a journey, huh? Wow.
For sure. And you know, I wouldn't say that the writing was on the wall, like that was a natural evolution. It wasn't at all. But if you think about it, a lot of the stuff that we had done on windsurfing in the early days, and what I mean by that is like chasing these outer reef waves, you know, from the horizon towards the beach, like, and picking them up on swells on a windsurfer, sort of paved the way for this tow surfing thing. Like when we first started tow surfing, it just felt natural because we had been there a million times. Like we knew how to read the wave while you're running with it from out to sea, you know, in. And so, yeah, that helped sort of ease our way into it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was a different beast completely. We didn't have, once you let go of the rope, you're on your own power, and it's way more of an intimate thing than windsurfing ever was for me, with big waves. Yeah, because you're on your own power. You bite what you think you can chew, and sometimes you bite off more than you can chew, and you end up getting, you know, destroyed. And sometimes it worked out, but with the towing, you had a better chance of it working out.
When was the last time you surfed Jaws?
2006 or 7, I think.
Okay,
it's been a while.
It's been a while. Yeah. So is it? Have you not gone back for self-preservation reasons, or like what's the? Or you've done your dash there, or?
Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot going on. So in 2000, I actually started it in 98. I started Cabrinha, but by 2000, when I got together with the Pride group to form the version of Cabrinha that we did in 2000, at that point I'd already been, you know, tow surfing literally every swell at Jaws since like 93. So by 2004, when I won the Billabong Double XL and that Guinness record, you know, we had been doing it already for, you know, a decade, every single swell, pretty much without fail. But I was running Cabrinha. I had a daughter, you know, there was a lot of balls in the air, and I was like out at Cabrinha doing my thing there. And then the swell would pop up on the horizon. I'd be like, drop everything and then put my head into this swell and go surf, and then come back to that. And I found that I wasn't giving it the respect that it needed, you know, because until then, that's all it was. Like, it was training and it was surfing for those whatever amount of days we were going to get out there. And then, you know, then I had all this other stuff going on, and I was like, you know, I think all of us in the strap crew right about that same time were already starting to get into other things as well. And I think we all kind of were like, yeah, we don't want to just be a part-time, you know, big wave surfer, especially at a wave like that, you know, like,
yeah.
There's no freebies. Like, sure, you tow in, but sure, you tow in, you can let go of the rope on 100-foot wave, and you still have to be able to deal with the wipeout if that's what happens. So yeah, I think we all kind of right around the same time maybe with the exception of Laird, but, definitely myself and my partner Rush at the time, and, Kalama and all the guys, really, like everybody kind of just kind of slowly kind of did the shady bounce.
Most of us, a huge proportion of us, are never going to ride a 50, 60, 70, 80 foot wave. Can you give us just a sense of how that differs and what that's like compared to, I don't know, for just a normal size wave for us mere mortals? I mean, what is the main differences, apart from obviously the size of the thing, but can you give us a sense of what that's actually like, on a wave like that?
Yeah, I can try.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's hard to explain is you can feel like the volume of the wave a lot more than a head high wave. And this is, maybe I'm just being obvious here, but speed is massive. Yeah, I mean, the speed is obviously one major difference. You're just going incredibly fast, and that wave, Piahi is right directly out from my house here. That wave is sitting right on the corner of the island where the trade winds just batter it, and so every little chop just turns into like a 3 or 4 foot wave of its own up on the face. And so at those speeds, you're navigating these massive bumps, and that's probably the hardest part of surfing that spot. When it stretches out and it gets clean, then you really feel the volume of the wave a lot more. You're no longer above it. You're really, getting into it, and the thing's pushing back at you, and you gotta, in order to keep the rail, and you gotta push back. And so you really learn how to, hold a rail for longer times and maintain your speed. And I don't know. I don't know if any of this is making much sense, but everything is just magnified. The sound you hear, the wind across your face, like you don't get that like surfing a head high wave. All of it.
Yeah, it must almost seem like a bit of a blur. There's so much going on. It's probably overwhelming the senses or something like that. Often. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's never about the moments that you're just surfing. It's the whole thing. Like a day out at Piahi, Jaws, is like a 24-hour experience. Like you're the day before, you're checking everything. You're checking your ski, your boards, tightening straps. You're just like, your head's already in it, and you're not even going to surf it for another 12 hours. And then you try to go to sleep and you don't sleep, and you're up at night because I can hear it from my house. I can hear it breaking, and you just hear these things, exploding on the reef. And, in a matter of hours, one of them's got your name on it. And so you get out of bed before sunrise, and, your head has got to be in the game that entire time. And then you get out to the break, and then it's a whole nother thing of like sizing it up and figuring out your game plan, and like, is it going to be the left? Is it going to be the right? What's, how are you going to surf it? And a lot of that evolves throughout the day, when the wind comes. So there's so much to it that it's a whole experience. It's rarely about that one, even though when you do get a good wave, that thing is ingrained in your mind. And I have a handful of those that I'll remember, like every water drop in detail.
Wow. Yeah, no, wow. For sure. That's crazy. That's amazing. How do you deal with fear? Whether you're, fearful of a 3-foot wave or a 60-foot wave, how do you deal with fear? Like, in a place like that, because obviously for most people, the thought of wiping out there or having to deal with whatever can happen there is pretty scary. How do you handle that or manage that?
So, yeah, let's be clear. Like, there was a lot of fear, and you just kind of acknowledge it. You look at it in the eye and just say, okay, I'm going to, I'm scared shitless. But what you end up doing is, and this is something that Brian Kealana really just in his own quiet way helped us out a lot with, is, and this is going to sound strange, but you think about worst case scenarios all the time. You in sizing up the risks, you have to figure out, okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen here? And then you work backwards from that. And if you identify it rather than pushing it out of the way, if you identify what is the worst thing that's going to happen, what are the things that could happen, then you confront them, and you have a game plan in your head, what you're going to do in those situations. And so it's kind of a pragmatic way to approach it. You're still completely scared, but at least you're thinking about what you're going to do in these situations, and you know how to confront it. And it's just a risk assessment. And when the time comes down, whether it's you surfing or whether you're driving your friend and your friend goes down, that to me was more scary than any time I'm actually surfing myself. When you got to go pick somebody up, that's pretty scary for sure.
Yeah. Having to navigate a jet ski within that arena. Yeah.
And then once you get a couple waves under your belt, the fear kind of subsides, the adrenaline's up, and you can start attacking it more and sometimes playing with it more. But if you let it get the best of you, you're gonna be on your back foot. You're gonna be a little bit more paralyzed. If you push all that stuff down a little bit, then you're on your front foot and you're just like attacking it, and which you definitely need to do out there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting though, because you said, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that could happen is you drown and die. So you do, in a way, you kind of have to face some pretty big issues and questions about yourself to even just get out there, which is, it's, isn't it? You have to deal with a lot of internal things.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah,
you do.
Yeah. And, super interesting.
And that was something that everybody was confronted with. So it's no different for anybody. I think it's just how people process that information.
Yeah.
And I would see. I don't know. Some people are just built different than others, and I would watch people that had just seemingly like this way less of a fear factor than like myself or whatever. They look like somebody that they could just walk into a MMA ring and take a hit and not even phase them. I don't know. There's some people are just built a different way. Me, I had a process. I had to go through.
Yeah. No, you obviously dealt with it very well, because you're one of the ones that really opened that whole area up to the world. It was an incredible time. I mean, obviously, I also got to witness that, because that happened obviously when I was a bit older. So I just remember, again, it was a bit pre-internet, but you would see, actually, pretty much my first time that it really hit me was I was actually working in a windsurf shop from 98 to 2002. And around that time we started selling the Jaws book, the one with lead on the cover. Like, there's a huge book. Remember that one? And that was pretty much the first time when all of a sudden they just hit the world stage. It was like, oh, it was a beautiful book, because it was so large that it gave you a sense of the size of the wave. If it was just in a little book, it would be a bit underwhelming, but not underwhelming, but you know what I mean? It was a small format, but because it was so big, it was just like, you open it up, you're like, holy shit, this thing's massive. It was interesting. And the other thing I want to touch on, I mean, this is a windsurfing podcast, and we hate talking about kiting. That's kind of a joke. We don't hate it. We're all in the same family here, but obviously, we have to touch on that, because it's obviously a big part of your journey. So obviously kiting comes around. You did mention there was sorry, I forgot his name, but you saw kiting somewhere from that guy, like the original kite surfer guy.
Bruno. Frenchman,
yeah, Bruno.
Bruno.
Yeah, so you were somewhere and you saw him, so like come and go, and thought, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
That happened? Yeah.
Yeah, that was in France, at an event in France. I think it was 1986. Yeah,
Wow.
There was a day without much wind, and he showed up on the beach with water skis, specially made water skis, and a kite. And he got into the skis on the sand and just ripped across the sand into the water and went out and around this point and disappeared. And we weren't even able to plane on windsurfers that day, and he was ripping, and we were just like, what did we just see? Like, what was that? But I didn't get to see it again for years. Somebody showed up at an event at Hokipa with a kite, but it was like a parapont. This wasn't an inflatable, it was a parapont. And I think he also had skis, and he was going to give a demonstration, and it didn't work out. And then it was years later, I think Manu Berton showed up with a Whippica. And I think Laird got his hands on either that one, or he got one of Corey Rossler's kite wings. And they were doing it here on the North Shore. And that's in the middle of all this tow surfing, when the strap crew was hanging out, and so we were like, whoa, what's this? But I still wasn't really that interested, because it looked like a downwinder kind of thing, and we were already past that. Like, in windsurfing, you want to launch here, you want to ride here, and then you want to come back here. And I wasn't really into just launching here and having to go downwind and then catch a ride back up. I was like, that wasn't it. And then one day I saw Flash. His name was Flash.
Flash, yeah.
And he got a jump and stayed in the air, kind of lofting, a lot longer than I'd seen any windsurfer do. And I was just immediately like, I got to check that out. And so I jumped into it like the next day.
But what about, like, because obviously now, like with kiting, you literally get hoisted up by the kite, and then you obviously have a much more gentle landing than windsurfing. Even though, yes, you can get more air time, you can go higher and everything. Did you still feel because there's a difference, isn't there? Like a windsurf jump and a kite surfing jump, they're two different beasts. They both have their pros and cons. You know what I mean? But like, what was it about the kiting that got you? Was it the fact that you could just go higher and you could have more air time? Like, what was it about it that you got you excited?
So at that point, so that would have been like mid 90s. I had been windsurfing for decades already.
Yeah.
And there was a freshness about it. I think that's one of the hooks. The other one was the fact, when we're talking about jumping, the fact that you could, on dead flat water, like glassy dead flat water, if there's enough wind, you can get huge air where you can't get that kind of air windsurfing. So I immediately thought, like, okay, well, this is going to open up spots around the world like that have that type of condition. And but my personal interest in it was just, it was fresh, plain and simple. It was fresh. And then once I started doing it and started to feel the energy around it, and that same kind of energy that was happening early when I first got into windsurfing, I was like, I want to look into this a little bit more. So I started to make some equipment for it. And then sure enough, all the right players were involved that were really, high profile and giving it a lot of eyes on it. And it just did what it did.
Rest is history. I mean, this is a whole topic that you could speak for hours on, is that whole kite surfing journey. I won't get into it too deeply because there's other podcasts that you've done where you talk more specifically about kite surfing. But I'm sort of more interested in also the relationship with windsurfing and kiting for this podcast. But when you started getting into kiting, the impression I had was that you just went all in on the kiting, and obviously the business would have been all consuming because you were, I assume, incredibly busy doing that. So at this point in time, did you basically just stopped windsurfing? Is that essentially, or?
It wasn't immediate. There was this transition, and I was finding those moments. I was like, because in the beginning, kiting wasn't that great for surfing, wave riding, let's say, surfing with a kite. It wasn't that great. And I didn't know at the time that it was going to end up where it is now, where guys are getting barreled and stuff. And so I was like, okay, if I want a wind sport and I want to ride waves, 100%, it's a windsurfer. If it's a windy day in the summer and there's not much surf, 100% I'm going to kite. So there was a time there where I had a place for everything, and my garage was just full of just stuff, and then we were tow surfing, and I started the business and had a child, and it was like there were so many things that I was like, I don't think I made a conscious decision like I'm going to just cut windsurfing out of my game. It just slowly got replaced by kiting. And
when sorry.
Yeah, and I know, I get it. I've been there with all of these sports where, there's camps and there's people who are like, oh, he's not a windsurfer anymore. And I'm just like, yeah, bring it on, whatever. Like, it's evolution. It happens. And, but I do, and this will always be with me. I have my core memories, like the best memories of my life, are my windsurfing memories. And if I'm being truthful, I always respect the fact that windsurfing has given me everything that I have now and everything that I'm doing now. Windsurfing did that for me, and for not just for me, but for everybody who's kiting right now, everybody who's winging right now. Windsurfing, they owe windsurfing a debt of gratitude, because that was the genesis of all of these wind sports. And sure, they've all been these mashups and hybrids that just keep compounding on top of whatever happened before, and to our benefit, to our enjoyment. So
yeah, no, that's cool that you acknowledge that, because I sort of see it the same. At the end of the day, all these wind sports, they're all windsurfing. They use the wind, and they're using a board that resembles a surfboard, or it's a surfing style board. They're just different ways of going about it, obviously. I mean, we like to have a bit of a joke about it because we're hardcore windsurfers, and that's what we do. To be honest with you, I kind of admire people who get into everything. They kite, they wing. I was just like, for me, it's like I've only really got enough time just to windsurf. If there's not enough wind for windsurfing or something, then I've got other things I've got to get done. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard for me to do everything, but it is cool that you acknowledge it, because at the end of the day, it had to start somewhere. I feel sometimes with windsurfing, it doesn't get the credit it deserves out there in the water sports community, because as you said, it did start off a lot of these things. And I think the history or the timeline of it isn't always that amazingly well documented. It's all a bit piecemeal, and trying to bring it together to give it the respect it deserves, I think, is important, just for the future of the sport as well. To create that sense of history about it.
For sure. Sure. Yeah. And let's talk for a second about what the state of windsurfing now, like Actually,
I was going to get onto that, so thanks for bringing that up.
Guys are able to do now. I mean, listen, I never in my wildest dreams would imagine that they're able to do what they do now. It's insane to me. It's insane. I have a few favorites. Like, one of my favorite riders is Marsilio. He just blows my mind. And Levi, and like, of course, I'm really into the surf style, but they've taken it so far beyond what I ever thought. I'd be willing to claim that some of the best big wave performance surfing is happening on a windsurfer. And it's a huge claim, but if you break down what Marsilio is doing out at Jaws right now, I think there's an argument there, and it's definitely something to be debated, but holy crap, like the way he can pull up under the lip on a proper Jaws size wave, hit the lip and project out. Not a kick out, not into the behind the wave, like out into the flats.
It's video game stuff.
It's loony, and I think you almost need to watch it with a fresh set of eyes to really see what he's doing out there. But it's that, and the power that he's got in like his top turns and bottom turns. Like it's insane. It's performance surfing at the highest level for sure. And it's also, this is the thing I love about it the most, is that it's performance surfing on a wave that most surfers probably wouldn't want to touch anyway. It's like you could surf it all morning when it's glassy, and then the afternoon out at Piahi, when the wind comes up, you throw your sail up and you do that. Like that just extends your game, and that's super impressive for me. It's always been what I've loved about the sport, but it's really, you can really see it out there.
Yeah, I think it's a good point what you made about Brasinho at Piahi as well, because even as a windsurfer, I still don't fully fathom what's going on. I mean, I can understand it. I can look at it and go, oh, wow, this is crazy. I can't even imagine hitting that lip. But it's still, no matter what you kind of think it is, you're probably still underappreciating what's actually going on. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah, because it's the power and just having to manage all the forces and everything going on and to make split-second decisions that could be then either oblivion, like it could be almost, you know what I mean? It could be almost death or something. Like it's intense. Like it's, and I know for a fact that a lot of people in the surfing community who don't have any idea of windsurfing, I mean, if I don't fully get it, imagine trying someone who doesn't even windsurf trying to understand it. It's that's where it sort of falls a bit under the radar. Windsurfing, people don't really appreciate what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, I've done kiting, windsurfing, hydrofoiling, tow surfing, all of that out at Piahi, and windsurfing is definitely one of the more difficult things to do, because the thing is, and you won't really get this unless you're a windsurfer and if you ride out at places like that. But a lot of times you have just barely enough wind to get in the wave. But once you get on the wave, the wave's moving so fast that you're overpowered. And so for you to be able to do those like redirecting top turns, back into it, you're basically fighting this 25, 30 knot apparent wind. And, you got to muscle your way through it. And it's so impressive.
Yeah, definitely. I think the interesting thing with windsurfing too is, with surfing a big wave, you've basically got two options. You paddle in or you're getting towed in. And with the paddle guys, they have to use quite a big board to obviously get into the wave. But then the problem is once you're on the wave, that limits your ability to turn, obviously with the size of the board. So then you're left with the tow, and then you can obviously use quite a knife looking sort of board that you can really start shredding it to pieces, but you need the jet ski, So with windsurfing, it sort of fills that gap a bit. You don't need I guess the windsurfer is the machine, so to speak, but it kind of fits in that gap in between there, doesn't it? Where you've got a board that it actually shreds harder than a big wave paddle board, but you don't need the jet ski to get into it. So it sort of sits in this weird zone again, which again, I'm not sure surfers fully appreciate. Actually, a good example of this is a friend of mine was windsurfing Margaret River, not actual Margaret River, but another wave just south of it. It's like a big wave spot, and it was probably 10 foot. I get like proper 10 foot. Like it was solid. Like and this guy was putting his leash on. Like my friend was rigging up his board, and my mate and the other guy goes, "Why would you windsurf out there?" And he goes, "Well, look at your board and then look at my board," because this guy had a big wave paddle board and it was quite a drawn out thing, whereas the wave board was a lot shorter and actually looked like a little rocket. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you actually look at the shape of the thing, it's quite a radical sort of craft, actually. So then when he actually compared his surfboard to the windsurfer, he started to understand. He said, "Oh, that thing actually looks like a little weapon." Like you know what I mean? Like if you actually lay the two things side by side, the windsurfer almost looks like some extreme little surfboard looking thing. Yeah. So I guess that's a kind of an interesting thing too. I mean, all these different sports, they all have their pros and cons. They all have their moments. I mean, like we take kiting, for example. There's plenty of days where you're in a particular spot where you think you'd be better off on a kite than a windsurfer because, I don't know, like for whatever reason, you look at the conditions. So every sport has their place. You know, it's you know, even though I like to we like to joke about it, but they all do have a place, don't they? And it just depends on the conditions. Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. I'm all for having, you know, all many tools in the toolkit.
Yeah. No, look, it's good. And just quickly touching on the business side, I won't get into it too deeply, but it seems to me that the Cabrinha brand, it became a major player in the kite surfing business. Just if you could sum it up in a short way, what was your experience in that business, you know, looking back in it? Because I believe you're kind of now, you're sort of out of that business. Is that true? It's sold or something? So what, just that general period, was it, I mean, I assume it was an incredible journey, but how hard was it for you? Was it very taxing mentally? You know, yeah, like, could you just give us a bit of a sense of that in a bit of a summary?
Yeah. So you can imagine I went from the brand Cabrinha started as a custom board brand here right in Haiku at the cannery, which is a minute from my house. We were doing custom kiteboards, being shaped by Dan Balfing, you know, with my design input and my label. And so we could do about, I don't know, we had the capability of doing like 300 a year. And I don't think we were even selling that much, but we were selling boards. And this was like early internet days. That's how they found information about us. It was a tiny little operation. It was a custom operation. We did a show in Miami, or was it Orlando? Anyways, we did a show in Florida. It was a trade show, and Neil Pride was there, and he saw our boards. He saw a couple of other things that indicated that this sport was starting to emerge. And so Neil and I got together and we did Cabrinha with the Pride group. And it was awesome. I mean, for myself, for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that at my fingertips, I had the ability to develop product in such a way that I could never have done organically here. I could have done it, but it would have taken many, many years. And Neil had the factories, he had the know-how. You know, he was the guy that made the very first kites, which was the original Whippicas. And the only reason he was able to make those was he was already making paragliders, which is a product that requires incredible quality control and just really tight margins. You know, like yeah. I mean, it's life or death. Like you're going to jump off a mountain with this. And so he had a real serious group of guys that could make kites in his factory. And so almost overnight, I was able to hit the market with designs, kite designs, board designs, accessories, like the whole thing, and feed it through his distribution. So I'm not saying that was easy, but it was definitely possible. And so we went after it, and we were able to grow very quickly and quickly become a player in the industry. And that was hugely satisfying, hugely challenging, just because the world is a big place and there's so many different appetites to do things differently in every country. And so navigating all of that was probably one of the biggest challenges, operating on a global stage like that. But I was in it. I was in for it. And I did that for, 20 something years. And if I'm being honest, one of the biggest challenges was being part of this group, which was the Pride group, because there were so many brands that came before me, all the Pride brands, the windsurfing brands, he had his hands in a lot of things. He did bikes, he did wetsuits and accessories and harnesses and all kinds of cool things. But it was kind of a beast. And Cabrinha was really, because of the times, was really strong. Kite surfing was doing extremely well. And the challenge for me was maintaining the group's focus where I wanted it to be, was of course on the Cabrinha product that was profitable and it was doing extremely well. And so at some point we had to wrestle it out of the group into another form, the US company. And that was right about the same time that I wanted to exit. So I ended up selling most of my stake in the company in 2020, which was 20 years after we started it. Yeah. And I stayed on with the company for a little bit, and then exited a couple years later. So now
and that's why you look so relaxed. Wow, that's crazy. Well, you achieved a lot in that time, because my impression, I wasn't in the kite surfing world so much. I could sort of see it from the outside, but from all accounts, you created an incredibly well-respected brand with an incredible amount of product and so forth. So that's a crazy achievement on its own. Right? It's probably it's amazing. Yeah, it's been incredible for me. The Cabrinha, that phase of the Cabrinha brand is amazing. It has been an amazing journey for sure. Like everything, there's always the sweet spot. There's, Cabrinha's got legs, it's got a group of guys that, have a good foundation to work with, and we'll see what they do. We'll see what happens. Yeah. And so ironically, back in the day, in the 80s, your competitions, fighting against Nash. But then in business, I guess you kind of were too, because Nash was also a big player in the kite surfing brand, right? Did you guys, was that a bit of a thing too, where in business was a bit of
yeah. There was a tough moment where I had to decide, I was actually working at Nash right about the same time that I started the board business under Cabrinha label. And at the time, Nash was just a windsurf brand, but kiting was showing up, and Don Montague was starting to make kites for Nash. And we all saw this as like, this thing is going to go somewhere. And so I was doing, by the way, I was doing marketing for Nash at the time and graphic design.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. And so I was kind of looking at how long was I going to do that, or could I do that, under the Nash label versus this other opportunity. So I had a chat with Robbie, and, it was tough. I wanted to exit and do my thing. And, I know it was tough for him and for the brand, the Nash brand, but he was really gracious about it. And I think we both knew at the time Cabrinha wasn't going to take any food off the table from Nash. They were so well established at the time. There was enough room for the two of us in this, and more, and then some, in this industry, which turned out to be the case. They thrived, we thrived, and it is what it is. And,
Yeah. And where do you think that,
yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What about the future of wind sports? What do you think? Because, obviously windsurfing, kite surfing, then winging, foiling. I mean, foiling is in there because of, the winging, and now parafoiling. I mean, where do you see all this playing out? If you could go forward 10, 20 years, do you think, I mean, could you give your thoughts on any of this? What do you see happening?
In 20 years, a lot.
Oh, yeah.
If you look back 20 years where we were, I mean, it never stops. It never stops.
Yeah, just keeps going.
So I can't tell you what exactly the cutting edge wind sport product will look like in 20 years. Because all I know is that it's going to be a hybrid of everything that's happening now, and then some external influence for sure.
Because it is almost hard to imagine where it goes from here, because it is getting so high tech, and everything's it's interesting. I sort of sometimes wonder if certain sports like windsurfing, I don't think it'll ever get back to 1985 or anything like that, but I wonder if people might sort of gravitate a bit more back to something that's considered a bit old school, just because they understand some of the benefits of it. A bit like with surfing, how people went back to mows or like easygoing boards. They sort of, this actually has a place. So I don't know. It's interesting.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
There's really, we talked about it earlier about just surfing. Yeah. Like the simplicity of it all. And there's something to that. And there was something to that in the early windsurfing one design. That was the original growth of the sport. They could show up at the beach and everybody's got the same gear. They can compete on the same level, or just go on the water and goof off. Like, it wasn't high tech. It was fun. And there's something to that. But wow, man, humans are pretty cool in the way that you throw something at them and see what they can do with it. And even like wing foiling in the surf has gone so far beyond what I thought it was.
Yeah. Well,
look at guys like Cash. The guy's amazing. Like, it's really, to me, as somebody who does it like every day, like, it's unfathomable, like what he's able to do. And I just love it. I think it's cool. And I really want to see where it's going to go for sure. But I do think, like everything else, it's probably not going to be just like this new, just out of nowhere thing. It's going to be, again, this hybrid. It's going to be what we're using today with some influence from something else that's going to just take it up a notch. And I'm 100% convinced in that. 100%, because that is the way it always works. It's always even taking something old like the hydrofoil. I mean, if you look at like photographs of the hydrofoil from, I don't know, World War II, like it's been around for a long time, and it went largely forgotten in almost every industry until recently. And
now look at it. I had to touch on this too, but when Ben set up this podcast, he created a thumbnail for, I don't know if you saw it, but it's an old picture of you with like this ancient looking wing. It looks like this yellow kind of triangle looking thing. I mean, were you one of the first people to actually sort of do this, like this wing foiling? Okay. Yeah, right.
Case in point. Yeah. So again, that was a Kailua thing, and we're down, and Andre Lefebvre and I think Jim Drake concocted this wing. And it was basically, like it looked in the image, like a little mini hang glider. They brought it down, and at the time there were a bunch of, big 12-foot boards around, and I jumped on one and was able to ride around, and I wasn't able to jump the thing because it just wasn't efficient, and neither was efficient. So it was a fun thing, and we did it for a little while. That wing was around for a bit, and we did a bunch of things with it. We even jumped off of sand dunes and flew it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years later when hydrofoiling came around, and I think Lagos kind of sniffed around and did some fun things with it, and then of course Ken Winter and a bunch of guys played around with the inflatable structures.
Yeah,
it just unlocked it, basically. It just unlocked it.
And when was the last time you actually went for a windsurf?
It would have been probably pre-COVID. Yeah.
Okay.
It would have been like just before COVID.
Okay.
But that being said, I've been thinking about it a lot.
And part of the reason, coming back.
Part of the reason is because, I just, I wing down the coast a lot, and there's a lot of windsurfers down the coast, and I see it a lot. I'm like, and even my wife my wife's was a windsurfer, and she's been talking about wanting to do it again.
Right.
So who knows? We'll see. We'll see.
This is what I'm talking about. So he's going to come back, and you're going to drive it again, mate. This is the news. I'm super curious to see what I can do. Still. Well, the thing is, it depends what you want to do with windsurfing, because obviously there's like flat water is still probably the biggest thing, because a lot of people live in lakes or in areas without waves. But I live here in Geraldton, and my favorite thing to do is just on a float and ride day where it's 15 to 20 knots, you have a floaty shortboard with a wave sail, and you just float around catching waves, and it's all very relaxing. It's not like you're getting blasted with 30 knots of wind and everything's, highly strung. You can just, the gear is so light now. It's very easy. Like you could just get on it and just hook in your harness and just chill. And the wind is so light that you can actually chat with people around you and stuff. Oh, there we go, catching some waves. And I find that currently probably my favorite things to do in windsurfing.
I know what you're talking about. I had a session in St. Bart's like that. We were using like tiny little. They were like kid sails on these big floaty boards, and we just kind of cruise out to the lineup and pick up on these like longboard waves. And it was it's like you said, you could chat with the guys next to you. It was super relaxing. Yeah. That was fun. That was, I mean, I'm hoping to do some high wind stuff too.
No, sure, but yeah.
Yeah, but I know what you mean. That's all very cool.
Oh, that's cool, man. It'll be awesome to see you out there, Pete. Like, I think it's people would love it. And just to, again, we could go on for hours. I'll sort of just get to the tail end of this podcast and just obviously touch on your art, because that is another thing, obviously, from what I can hear, has been a big thing for you lately. You're a very talented artist from what I could see. So that's obviously, that's been consuming a fair bit of your time, has it, the last few years?
Yeah, it's, I maybe mentioned, I was doing graphic design for many years. It worked its way into, first I was doing it for Gastra, doing all the marketing material for them. And when we left Gastra and did Nash, I moved right into the Nash marketing. So graphic design was kind of always a thing. And then I used some of my first art pieces were sort of large scale graphic style art pieces. It's like photo-based collage with a lot of different elements. So I've as you can probably see, I've sort of stayed with that as well. I do a lot of photo-based collage work, but I do a lot of painting as well. Like that piece just behind, you can see it's painted, but then there's some collage work as well. And I also just paint. I do a lot of just pure painting as well now. And I got to say, I love it. It's like, it's perfect for this time in my life and what I do. And I surf a lot. And when I come back, I got that. I can just, this is my studio right here. And I have a place where I can really express myself how I want. So it's cool. I don't know.
So these pieces, are they getting sold like you sell them in galleries or something? Or?
Yeah. I work with a gallery here in Maui, but a lot of the work, I would say a majority of the work goes off island, and it goes worldwide. So we ship my art everywhere, Asia, all over Europe, all over the States, South Pacific, like it goes everywhere. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, I see. And does your wife help you in that endeavor, or does she go? What does she do?
Well, as a art critic, she does. She comes in and she's like, I like that one, and she can't help herself because she is an artist in her own right. She'll come in and try to give her influence, but she's a fashion designer, and so
okay, well, that's also very art based.
Yeah, her brand is called Anakoko. Check it out. It's beautiful. She does some really cool stuff.
So where's that sold?
Well, she sells in high-end boutiques, and then also on her website as well.
Oh, right. Okay, cool.
How do you social media ways these days too? Instagram.
Okay, cool. Oh, awesome. Okay,
is what it's called.
How do you spell that?
ANNACOCO.
And okay, cool. Okay, I'll check it out after this podcast.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a tradition, although Ben and I haven't done it for a long time, but in the early podcasts, we would, or not so much myself, I wasn't involved then, but there'd be kind of like 5 questions that would just be thrown out to the guests. And I can't remember exactly the 5 questions, but I think I've got most of them. So I'll sort of end the podcast with these 5 questions. So who, in your opinion, who is the most underrated windsurfer?
Oh, wow. We're going hot seat questions here. The most underrated windsurfer? Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
See, my vision of like all the available windsurfers today is pretty small. Like I see, what's going on at Hokipa and a bit beyond. So I don't.
But like back in your day, like back when you were doing the tour, or back in those days, anyone that you thought might not have got the attention they deserved, or even people that did get the attention, but you still think they're underrated.
I don't know. I think just a name that comes to mind, and there's many of these names. There's many of these people, so it's not the definitive one. But you gotta give a lot to Mark Angulo. Like he was, and it was fun for me to like watch his process. And I love. There's 2 ways to approach things. Like you see somebody do something, and then you can go, okay, I'm gonna try that, but I'm gonna try it with this. I'm gonna modify it. Mark would just throw it up and out there and see what happens. Like he would like do this jump, get like wind blown backwards, falling out of the sky, and maybe spin, and then you see the wheels turning, and he's like, okay, something happened there, and I'm going to try get myself into that position again, and that is like real, just organic innovation. I love that. And then there's the guys that I've been talking about. I guess they're not underrated, but
no, but Mark's that's an excellent answer. I think
Mark's a name.
He's somebody that a lot of people talk about, and hopefully we can get him on the podcast as well, because he's one that would be amazing to hear from. A pet peeve. Do you have a pet peeve?
Oh, wow. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes. My pet peeve today is how everything in the world has become political. It's horrible, but whatever.
Well, especially since also you're living in a US state of Hawaii, and obviously a lot of American politics is in the news a lot, isn't it? Oh my God.
Yeah.
No,
I think everybody just everybody needs to get back to their life and before this polarization.
Yeah. No, that's a fair one. A guilty pleasure.
Ooh. Well, art is for sure one of my guiltiest pleasures, because it's such a self-fulfilling thing. And I can try to justify, but yes, the people that buy my art also, it makes them feel good. So, okay, I can justify it that way, but truly, like, having the good fortune to be able to come in here and create art is a guilty pleasure. And movies. Like, I've always been a movie buff. So.
Oh, okay. What's can I ask the question? If you had to pick a movie, favorite movie, or something stick out?
Here we go again.
That wasn't on the list, but I'll ask you now. What's a?
I don't have a favorite. I don't have a single favorite.
Yeah. Well, what sort of genres do you like?
So anything. Lately, it's been a lot of sci-fi, but unfortunately, almost everything now is like either sequels or, I like inventive sort of where they create worlds that that didn't exist. Avatar was a great one when the original came out. That was pretty amazing, right? Hard to argue. They created this whole world that didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's I know what you mean. Yeah, it's a bit of a different business now, the movie world, isn't it? It's a whole different. People don't go to cinemas anymore. They sit at home and watch Netflix or YouTube. But
that works too.
Yeah. Top 5 windsurfers.
Wow. See, you're gonna make me dig here. Of all time?
Yeah, what you think. Let's whatever. All time, all time, sure.
I'll just throw out 5 names. It's hard to say top 5.
I know.
Of course, Robbie's going to be in that mix. He's at the top there or somewhere in there. I already mentioned Mark Angulo, just for what he contributed in his era. Wow. I've already mentioned Marsilio.
Yep.
I think he's just one of my favorites to watch. Levi's one of my favorites to watch. On the European side, how can you not have this list without Bjorn Dunkerbeck? I would have to put Mike Waltz in there, just because of the contributions he made early on, especially.
Yeah.
How many is that?
That's 5. Yeah. Well, that is a very good list. So that's fair.
It would, it's unfair to all the others that should be on that list. It's not a definitive, but it's a stream of names that just come to mind.
Yeah, no, it's a hard one. I understand. The 5th one, I couldn't remember what used to be called, so I've just kind of gone with my own, and I think I know what maybe your answer's gonna be. But your current favorite windsurfer of the modern generation, and I think I know what you're gonna say. I'm assuming, or I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I think it's Brownie.
Yeah. No, it's incredible, isn't it?
I'm sounding like a fanboy here, but gotta call it like it is. Yeah, he's pretty good.
Oh, actually, sorry, Andy's just reminded me what the 5th one was. Sorry, favorite windsurfing spot. Thanks, Andy.
Good. That's a good one. I have a couple. obviously bread and butter Hokipa has been one of them, but actually my favorite spots are any left. So Cloudbreak is one of them. And then it's little brother Namotu lefts. There's a couple unnamed spots that
secret spots.
That are lefts that I guess I shouldn't even say if I'm going to say they're secret.
All good.
Yeah. But Cloudbreak, let's just say Cloudbreak is probably one of the best ones that I've ridden.
Did you get to see any of the footage of the event that happened a couple of years ago? Did you watch some of that? Yeah, it was pretty gnarly.
A couple of the aerial off the lips were crazy. Some huge makes and just some huge just destroyed. That was very difficult conditions. The wind was super light. It was quite offshore. They made it it didn't look easy, but they did bloody well. It was very hard conditions to sail. So it was an interesting experience. Pete, we've been going for almost 3 hours, and I honestly could probably talk to you for hours. Yeah, I could. I hope that I've done some justice to your legacy, because it's very hard to get it all in a podcast, because we're talking about a lifetime of achievement and so forth. But I feel that I have a better understanding of a lot of the stories about yourself and, how it all came about. And I have to say, after listening to your journey, you pretty much couldn't, it'd be hard to write a much better book about a life that is full of adventure and satisfaction, or whatever you want to call it, because it sounds like a very rich and full life that you've lived so far. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's been amazing, and no doubt about it. I feel really fortunate. I don't know. There has never been a master plan, really. But I've had just sort of one guiding principle the whole way. Like I've always just tried to pursue the things that I enjoy, and then figure out how to make that part of my living, my life. And once you do one, then the rest kind of become easier, because you sort of know the format, or at least you've had success at one, and it makes the others easier. But thanks. It's been an amazing journey and good time, and it's been great chatting with you about it all.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, I'm so happy we finally got there in the end, and it'll all come full circle, Pete, because you're going to get back into windsurfing again. So
I will do. I'll shoot you. Awesome. You're going to get a text one day.
Oh my God!
I'm not claiming anything. But
go find a left. Yeah, no, sick, man. All right, Pete. Well, till next time. Thanks again for everything, and I'm so happy that we finally got there, mate. So all the best, and we'll chat next time.
Cheers, Paul. Right on.
See you, mate.
It's
that time of the week again. Sit back, relax, we got the brain of band. No need to stress, in the house is Van Bellen. The game is windsurfing, you can't yell them or tell them. We get the news, the views, the win biz, the brands, gear, tips, plus the world's best quiz. The Cubs, PWA, we're professionals without the pay. There's nothing in pole dancing that we won't chat. From tandem boards to a windsurfing cat, it's your one-stop shop for a laugh and listen. Tune in each week or you'll be doing the missing.